Plus, she's the organizer for Lucy, the Los Angeles Union Cooperative Initiative. She is a graduate of the University of California, Los Angeles. Professor George Kallas teaches political science, history, and government at the Miramar Community College in San Diego. He's also the political research consultant and executive producer of financial-related productions of the WSDE, Worker Self-Directed Enterprise, Arete Media Productions, and is the lead for Democracy at Work San Diego. Eric Boyd is a lifelong athlete and a coach, competing and coaching currently in CrossFit and weightlifting. He is also a co-owner of Interactive Fitness Systems, a local gym that is working towards becoming a worker cooperative and is working to form another co-op, the Platform Co-op Investment Club, an international investment club looking to help platform startups which wish to incorporate cooperative principles. He's also the co-lead for Democracy at Work Pasadena. Before we get started into this discussion, we are going to talk about, as you can probably guess from the introduction, worker cooperatives, or more specifically, worker self-directed enterprises. Let's watch a video with Professor Richard Wolff.
This is Richard Wolff with another Econo Minute. I want to talk to you briefly about economics, democracy, and the way we do business. I want to make a simple point. If you believe in democracy, as I suspect most of us do, then you know it means basically that if you are affected by a decision, you have the right to participate in it. You know, that's the idea about our political system. Since we are affected by the decisions made by mayors and senators and governors and presidents, well, we participate in their decisions by having the authority to hire and fire them, to vote for them, or to vote against them. At least we have some participation in the decisions. But it is not that way in capitalist enterprises. In those, here's the typical story. A tiny group of people at the top, the owner, the management that the owner chooses, or in a modern corporation, the major shareholders, usually a dozen or so institutions or people who decide who is on the board of directors. That's usually 15 or 20 people, and they make all the key decisions. They decide what to produce, how and where, and what to do with the products of the labor of all the people. And what about all the people who work in an enterprise? They have no participation at all. They are excluded from deciding what to produce, how to produce, where to produce, and what to do with the profits and the net revenue. That's not a democratic system. But there is a democratic way of organizing an economy, and it's not capitalism. It's called worker cooperatives, and it's an old idea whose time has come. Here's how it works. All the people who work in an enterprise, all of them, one person, one vote, they make the decisions democratically. What to produce, how to produce, where to produce, and what to do with the profits that, after all, they've all helped to produce. It would change our economic system. It would democratize not just the enterprises, but the system as a whole. It's long overdue. It's what democracy means when you bring it to the economy, which we should have done long ago. This is Richard Wolff for Econo Minute.
All right, worker self-directed enterprise. That is a business that's owned, as you saw in the video there, owned and run by all the workers. Then that means basically one person has one vote. And if you choose to have stocks, then you also have one stock per vote, right? That's not necessarily what you find in corporate environments, believe me, I know. So there's also no external investors or managers. Everything is done, the most important decisions particularly, if not all of them, are made by everybody within the organization. You can hire and fire who you want. You decide again democratically. What happens with the surpluses and the losses? Again, democratically. So you decide whether or not to keep operations in the community, and it's always people before profits, which Professor Wolf has talked about extensively. So what we're going to do now is we're going to talk about the different types of cooperatives, here with the team. And we want to make sure everybody's aware. Before we get into the nitty-gritty, we want to discuss that. There's a lot to talk about. And starting off with just the basic idea of worker cooperatives, as you've already learned, hopefully, one person, one vote, democratic decision-making in business. And everybody owns the business. Now, there are different types. And the reason why Professor Wolf talks about worker self-directed enterprises is to distinguish those from the different types of cooperatives. Because when they're worker-directed, that means we make the decisions in the workplace where we work, okay? So there's other types like housing co-op. Like there's an example, correct, Elizabeth, here in LA?
LA Eco Village. It's,
yes.
They do a land trust, and all of it is owned, by everybody that lives there. And they have meetings, and they decide democratically all the decisions that have to be made to run their housing cooperative. LA Eco Village. And if you live in the local area, you should definitely try to visit it. They do, on Sundays, they do tours. It's quite an operation.
And I think you have to make reservations ahead of time.
Yes, you do.
To
Go to the
there
website.
with Lois.
Lois Arkin.
Yeah.
She's my idol.
Yeah, I know
I want to
Lois.
meet Lois Arkin when I grow up.
Yeah.
I think projects like that are so important right now, especially when we have speculation on rental properties at an all-time high,
Yes.
especially
Right.
from foreign entities buying up rental properties. And so, from what I understand, those are typically less expensive than their, I guess you could say, capitalist counterparts.
Well, yes, living in a housing cooperative, yes, you're working together to have ownership.
Yeah.
And this is a true danger in our society right now, the fact that we're losing ownership of our land
Yeah.
and our
Yes.
economy. We've lost ownership of our economy. And now,
long
as you
ago.
said, so many speculators coming from overseas and buying up the housing, in Los Angeles, it's a real concern. There's a housing crisis in Los Angeles.
There is.
And people are speculating and buying up the land, and soon we will not own our own housing.
That's right, that's right. Well, a lot of capitalism basically have moved overseas.
Mm-hmm.
So, while China's economy is, I guess, relatively stable or something like that, so when you have people coming here buying up the property, there's a lot of
Right.
Chinese investors coming into Southern California and all over the place now. Just like in Hawaii, when the Japanese started buying up stuff there, during their economic boom, and you see a lot of Japanese people in Hawaii. Well, that's how that happened.
Well, it goes deeper into income inequality, because the average income in Los Angeles is $50,000 a year.
Yeah.
The average price of a house is $400,000. You
Yeah.
cannot qualify. The average wage earner cannot qualify to buy the average house.
Now, wouldn't that average, because that's a whole other topic we
Yeah.
get into, but isn't that average? I always thought I hear that like $50,000 is the average. Isn't that like if you count
Household.
all the multi-millionaires included in that mix? Because if you
it's
cut
household
out the
income also, which means you're counting that's multiple incomes. That's two
Yeah.
parents both
Yeah.
holding sometimes two jobs
Yeah.
to support themselves and their children.
But if you were to cut out the
So-
multi-millionaires, let's say, and the millionaires here in the LA area, I think that figure would go down
Yeah.
drastically in an average, personally.
Yeah.
I think.
So essentially, it's a privatization of housing as
Yeah,
opposed to
yeah.
bringing people together into ownership.
Right.
So that would be essentially part of the neoliberal project, where you privatize the public domain and housing, health, and so
Yeah.
forth. So all these things are tied together.
Exactly, exactly. Consumer cooperatives are owned and controlled by people who buy goods and services. Here in North Pasadena, there was a food co-op store. It's no longer open, sadly. It was a nice little place. But you had to be a member to go in there and buy the food, the organic food that came from more local growers. There's also REI, which is a recreational company. Now there's producer, agricultural, and marketing cooperatives. And I know, Elizabeth, you kind of put the the agricultural and the marketing together. Could you explain a little bit about that?
Well, you take an organization like Sunkist. There's, I believe it's 49 producers. They each own their own farm, but they come together under the name of Sunkist to market their product. So yes, they are producing agricultural produce, but they come together as a cooperative to market their product.
So the California cheese companies like that too? Or
Yeah,
the
it's
companies?
marketing.
Yeah.
Cooperative. And the other types of cooperatives, there's many cooperatively owned businesses, but only worker cooperatives solve the labor problems, because only worker cooperatives are the ones that, actually the workers are democratically in control. So you take even Co-Opportunity Market in Santa Monica, it's a wonderful market and they do very good things, but the people that work there are not the members. It's the consumers that buy there that are the members of the cooperative. So you can have just as many labor problems with cooperative businesses if it's not a worker cooperative as any business.
That's very true. There's also the purchasing cooperative, which again is not a WSDE. And what is exactly a purchasing cooperative? How does that differ from a consumer?
Well, they're kind of the same thing.
It's
a buying group. I was a member of something way back in the early 70s called the Free Venice Food Conspiracy. We met at a Methodist church, Ocean Park Methodist Church, and we were a buying club. We'd get together and combine our list of groceries for that week and then buy as a group, a buying group, and then redistribute it. So it's just a buying group. It's the same thing as a consumer cooperative.
And I've heard of, I have Israeli friends that have, one that even talked to me about actually living, as a child, living on a kibbutz.
Yes.
What is that exactly?
Well, it's a farming cooperative, but it's like the housing cooperative. But you also have one of my favorites, cooperative childcare is part of it.
Oh wow!
Yes, and
wow.
cooperative education, cooperative schools.
It's been a
it's a combined
project. They've been around since the early 1900s.
Right.
Yeah.
It's one of the success stories.
Yeah.
And I know, and here in Los Angeles, there's an artists community at what used to be the old Pabst Brewery downtown, the LA Brewery. Because I love going there for their art walks twice a year.
Oh yeah.
What kind of cooperative is that? Do you know?
Well, again, it borders on being sort of a marketing cooperative,
It
right?
is, yeah.
Because you have independent producers bringing their what they produce on their own together just for the gallery, just for showing it. And Native American communities do this also. In New Mexico, there's a number of where the tribes come together. They have a store. They bring all of their jewelry that they make and they market it together. It's a cooperative. Yeah, right by Albuquerque.
Yeah. I think I've heard of that actually. Because when I went through the Amtrak train there, I saw there were groups there selling jewelry together, and they obviously were different groups.
They have a beautiful store north of Albuquerque, and many of the pueblos bring their jewelry there.
Yeah, it's beautiful. It's like turquoise stuff. Anyway, I could go on.
Forever.
But there's also the multi-stakeholder hybrid cooperative. Now that's a model basically where both members and the workers control the business. So there is an option for that to be a worker cooperative.
Well, you can have a worker cooperative. Let's say the store is, the people that work there are a worker cooperative, but then you also have the consumer aspect where the consumers become members of the consumer buying group, which are both, together. Now, we have so many different types of cooperatives because really this came out of the populist movement, the turn of the century, late 1800s, early 1900s. So even credit unions came out of that.
Wow.
So this is a cooperative financial institution.
And we're definitely going to get more and more into that in future episodes of the show. There's a couple of top experts in that subject, world experts that will probably be on this show as we go further on into the year. I'll just FYI.
I'd be curious, are there any, and you have the concept of producer cooperatives, obviously we're talking about worker cooperatives here, are there companies that do a hybrid wherein you have worker cooperatives that bundle together, so to speak, in a producer cooperative to, I guess, create a larger...
That would be Mondragon.
Yeah, that's what I thought that's what they were.
And see, that's a network of worker cooperatives, and they have all different types of worker cooperatives there. They have manufacturing, which is the fundamental basis, economic basis, but then they have a university, they have schools, they have social healthcare systems, they have banks.
Right.
All of these things are worker cooperatives and fall under the rubric of Mondragon Underground Corporation.
So it's
for
kind of a
that.
federation of cooperatives.
It's a
Right.
network. Yeah.
Right, and we'll get into that in a little
Yeah.
more detail as we go forward in this. So, and then there is something I participate in when I worked in the corporate world. Okay, I had to do that. Employee Stock Option Program Cooperative, or ESOP.
Right.
So I know exactly what that is. You know,
But not everybody
I did not have as many shares as the CFO and the COOs and all that. So definitely not an advocate for greater equality of wealth and income. That is for sure.
Well, so now we get into the terminology. How does the term worker ownership differ
Right.
from the worker cooperative and other types of cooperatives? Worker ownership, you have a huge continuum of, very few shares. Somebody at Home Depot may have 5 shares,
Right.
but they do not participate in decision making. They have no further rights. There's
That's right.
still the management, all the labor problems, and a corporate ownership where the majority of the shares are owned by stock, shareholders who are investors who are not doing the work.
Yes, that's right.
It's not the same. Worker ownership, is a huge continuum. It can be one if you get to 100% worker ownership, then you've got a worker cooperative.
That's right. That's right.
But all other flavors are not.
And even if it was one person, one vote, how is it? How is one vote is not equal to obviously 1 million votes?
Right.
You know what I mean, right?
Yeah.
So that's a big problem. So now when we go around the table here and we'll be a little more specific, what is each person's involvement in education, advocacy, and proactiveness in creating cooperatives?
Mm-hmm.
So I'm also going to be part of that conversation. So before we get into the history, let's go around the table here, starting with George. Well, actually, let's start with Liz.
Okay, well, so I've been involved, like I said, with cooperatives most of my adult life. Worker cooperatives, somebody really kind of turned the light bulb on for me in the 80s, in the 90s, that they actually solve a problem for labor, for the workers, which is that it returns the means of production to the worker. And this is true economic independence and true ownership of the economy. So I became involved at that time, and now I'm the co-chair for the Union Co-op Council for the U.S. Federation of Worker Cooperatives, and and I work to create worker cooperatives here in Los Angeles, and I also did in Las Vegas when I lived there. The issue is that worker cooperatives have to see themselves as part of the larger labor movement. And so consequently, I'm trying to build bridges between the current, unions and worker cooperatives.
Fantastic. Eric?
Well, I grew up in a very conservative family, and I ended up.
We all have
Yes.
dark history.
ended up, getting involved in a few different things that radicalized me and switched my direction, I guess you could say. And I got very interested in the cooperative movement right around 2006, maybe 2007, as a result of just learning a lot from actually Noam Chomsky, and I had a lot of friends who gave me some, or I had discussion with, mostly online, who were a lot further left than I was at the time. I had started my leftward spiral, I guess you could say.
Upward spiral.
Upward spiral, there you go. And I at the time was a very big fan of small businesses, and I realized there's nothing. The logical conclusion of going in that direction was because the idea was, oh well, this is all about freedom, and I hate these large corporations. And the logical conclusion to that was, well, there's no more ethical business than a worker cooperative. I didn't know they existed at the time, and I had friends that raised my awareness of that, and it was like a light bulb switched on. So ever since then, it's been, lots of research done on the topic, and working towards hopefully someday becoming that. So I've been involved in athletics my entire life. I was a college football player. I was a shot putter. I also got into weightlifting. I competed at the national championship for weightlifting, and through that process, I got closer and closer to the point of becoming a teacher in various disciplines. And I, decided, hey, I'm going to go into fitness as a career. And I got brought into an organization. It was a CrossFit gym called CrossFit Survival. And the person that owned it, me and her clicked, and she was grooming me towards becoming her partner, and I was adamant about becoming a worker cooperative. And she fell out of love with CrossFit and fell into love with survival and decided to move out to North Carolina for that and left me with the business. And I brought on 2 partners so far who are trying to help me realize that vision, and I have a number of others that I'm grooming on a mentorship on the physical fitness side of things, and trying to plant the seed of worker ownership. So it's kind of my journey.
And you're also interested. You're also part of an international
Yes,
group?
that is correct. So we have what's called the Platform Co-op Investment Club. I have a associate that I actually met online through a lot of my radical left. I have a lot of the background of my education came through what is perplexingly to most people called the libertarian left, with the anarchist bunch, and I studied a lot on Pierre Joseph Proudhon is probably my biggest inspiration in terms of philosophically. And he started a school of thought called mutualism, and I met through a discussion group on that topic with a guy named Matthew Kropp, and he turned me on to a few different groups that he's involved with in terms of he's got a Vermont club, and I think there are a few other clubs out there right now that are small investment clubs. They're just like a couple $100 investments into cooperatives, and a number of people that are involved are also involved in credit unions. And so we have, I think, 25 or so members right now.
So it's like investing in cooperatives.
Yes. So this particular one is
like being a member, or?
So no, it means that we're all members who pool together our capital to try to. We make democratic decisions. We run as a cooperative and we invest in cooperatives.
I see.
And
That's interesting.
the other ones are all local. This is the first of its kind that's international. And our goal is to. And one of the things that got us involved with this thing was that there was a big initiative for buy Twitter and turn it into a cooperative. And
oh, really?
That was the big thing that we were like, oh well, let's try to shoot for that, and a number of others. And platform companies, for those who are not aware of this, think like Uber, for example, and Airbnb. And so what we're looking at is making investments on globally impactful platform companies that would be run as worker cooperatives.
Interesting.
So,
thank you for sharing that.
Absolutely.
And George.
Yes.
Yeah.
Well, my background actually, interestingly enough, with the concept of co-ops actually started when I was very young. I'm second generation Greek American, and my father was, as he used to tell me, that democracy is a Greek word, which means people work together.
Yeah.
And I was raised in a small family business, which essentially was by nature a co-op.
Yeah.
So I grew up in that culture. And that, like we're sitting at this table, everything is decided at the table equally. Okay, so that has kind of carried me through my life. But when the 2008 crash happened, I was introduced to Professor Wolf's Democracy at Work movement. And ever since then, I've been trying to promote this through my classes, and then outside, I became the San Diego coordinator for Democracy at Work. And we met here in LA some time ago.
Yes.
And
actually, we met at the very first Democracy at Work Los Angeles group meeting that took place at the Santa Monica Public Library.
Right.
So, and that's how this discussion began to create a worker cooperative.
Right. So we wanted to actually put it into practical action. And so ever since then, and by the way, this, I believe July is the anniversary of the movement now for this Democracy at Work.
Yeah,
and
I think you're right.
Beginning last year, it's been spreading kind of like wildfire. Now it's actually going global. So it's addressing the institutional crisis of the capitalist system. It's
That's
not
right.
being able to provide for all. So democracy at work essentially means that. You're putting work in the hands of democracy. You're
That's
putting
right.
workers in front of the whole process of creating, essentially transforming the capitalist economy.
That's right.
Okay?
Because we have to go to the next system, which
Yes.
we're going to get into. That's one of the many topics we're going to get into going forward on this show. There's unlimited content, actually, the more we get into this. But this is a start today, you know. But basically, we are official as of June 1st. We have a cooperative, I would call it worker self-directed enterprise,
Yes, it's
which
a-
is called Arete Media Productions. And what we're focusing on is media production and education. So we're getting ready to expand, and obviously you're watching the NOWMAN Show. This was the first already existing production for us to start working together on. So what you saw at the heading, the intro, was the first project that we completed together. And it was, and this been everything. We'll get into more details of this later on, but it's been a total joy, a lot of work, and that's what we're going to get into in another segment about how, more specifically about that. But that's, and I'm also the original lead of the Pasadena group of Democracy at Work here in Pasadena. We just started, and we're having monthly meetings to educate one another and people in the community interested about this whole process. And our focus is really on, with Arete Media and myself personally, is not only to be a part of the community, which I am, and not only to be an advocate for education and an activist, which I've always been, but to always actually put this into practice and step by step talk to others about how to do that, and we're going to get into that as well. Watching the NOWMAN Show, and I am here at Politicon with Ed Asner and Christina Tobin. And first of all, Ed Asner is, of course, a TV, film, voiceover actor, as well as a longtime activist. And Christina Tobin is the founder of Free and Equal Incorporated. We're going to get into what all this is all about and talk about where we are right now in political and economic crisis in this country. So thank you very much for joining us, and it's an honor to have you both here. For those of you who might not know Mr. Asner's career, he's won multiple Emmys, television programs such as Mary Tyler Moore and Lou Grant. We played the same character.
The checkered one.
The checkered one, yeah. That's what the Hollywood Reporter would say, right? Yeah. And for those younger, if you're into animation, he was also the voice you heard in Up, which was also an Academy Award-winning film recently. And And Christina's been involved. Well, we can talk in more detail. You can explain it. Yeah. How you've been involved in third parties and supporting independence, etc. First of all, you just finished a talk here, Blake, and I have a quote here of you said, "We are living a lie. Our day of reckoning is now here." Can you elaborate on that?
Did she say that or did I?
You said that.
Oh, I can't believe I said that.
I don't know.
We got it on tape. So.
I'm sure.
Yeah.
It's a printing error. Well, we are living a lie, don't you think?
Yeah.
We are in a facade.
Because we don't represent the people that we have in this country. Our voting percentages are sucky.
Yeah.
They're sucky, and we keep finding, in this particular case, the Republicans keep creating voting machine problems, question the constant gerrymandering of districts, both locally and statewide, and unless the people rise up and say enough, because we're even corrupting the courts now.
That's right.
And this latest edition, what's his name? Strange name. To the
Scaramucci?
No,
Oh.
not that joker. The latest justice, Supreme Court justice. What's his name? See, kind of Americans are. You don't even know.
Yeah, I know.
About to replace them all in.
Yeah, I know. There's so many that. But you know,
It is an illusion, though.
It is an
I
illusion.
agree, a facade that we've been living in. That just the reality is that the two-party system has not been serving we, the people. And so until and when we rise together as a nation, as a world, as a country world, that's when we're going to bring about real change, believing in change and hope. That's where we stand at with Ed and being a supporter of Free and Equal Elections Foundation, which I founded, but it's for the people. This foundation's for you guys. And so that's really, consciousness is rising, and
Yes.
We are seeing what's real, what isn't real. And that's why we're here today with media like you. We find you to be real media,
Yes.
telling the real truth of the people out there. So, and Ed as well, Bill's joining us for that.
You think
reason.
America should rule the world?
No.
No.
I think that the people should maybe come together and really not allow narcissistic,
Well, you're supposed to have a thing
sociopathic
called the UN
politicians
for
to run
that,
our country.
Isn't
The
that what-
UN's not something.
UN's not going to do that.
Then what do you want to create that's going to be better than the UN?
Free and equal elections. Article 1, Section 3 of
And
the
you're going to be able to
Constitution.
see that it's done throughout the world.
All elections shall be free and equal, yes. But we've got to fix the United States of America first.
What about
The whole world's
proportional
watching us.
representation? Does that enter into fair and equal?
Yes.
Yes.
Free and equal elections, proportional representation, I feel is
Ranked
probably-
choice voting?
Alternative voting methods are solutions. So many people are talking about all the problems, left and right, the divide. A lot of panels here
Yeah.
at Politicon
Yeah.
are that way. But I think more in the future are going to be about uniting and solutions and coming together. So definitely going in that direction.
But you know, one of the things that you don't see in Europe, which we see here, is like Citizens United, which opened the floodgates to private money coming into our process. You know, I've interviewed people even on this show that will tell me, like in the Netherlands, for instance, lobbying money, private money going into the government is actually illegal, and you go to prison. And yet, it's the natural way of how business is done here. And obviously,
Why, the Netherlands is such a little country
oh,
and has leakage problems. And we don't have any of that.
oh, do we?
Do you want to become the Netherlands? You're going to have to put up dams and dikes,
Oh, that's true, eh?
you know?
Yeah, yeah.
You keep out the water.
Yeah, yeah,
Not fun.
That's not fun. Yeah,
And
yeah.
there ain't much profit in it either.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
Well, maybe you can make an analogy that we're putting up dams and dikes to democracy through the system that we have. That's why it's in a crisis.
Oh, but those are okay.
Because we have the Electoral College. Now, what is the plan to go through the electoral system institutionally? What have you proposed?
On the judicial side, last I checked, it's a two-party system
Right.
that
Yeah.
chooses who runs our judicial system, which is flawed. I mean, the fact
Okay.
the prison systems are primarily filled with people because of past possession of marijuana. I mean, there's so much greed
Yes.
and money, and then pharmaceutical, it's a whole nother thing. But as far as on the electoral side and institutionalized, I love that you brought up proportional representation. Talking about different alternative voting methods like score voting and approval voting, ranked choice voting, which is also known as instant runoff voting, which I think the Grammys used that. Maine just passed it.
Oh, really?
I see it spreading throughout the U.S. very quickly.
What's that, proportional?
Yes,
Proportional.
yes. I mean, that is something very dear for over 10 years. I've been manifesting and through free and equal elections. That's something I feel that would really
So you're
serve our
starting
elections.
your strategy at the grassroots level, state, local, regional.
Yes, real change. A wise man once taught me by the name of Mr. Ed Asner.
Oh, God.
At our
Not him
candidates
again.
forum in Cambria, California, where we're headquartered, real change starts from the bottom up.
Has to.
Gotta run for local office, and that's
That's
when you
right.
get into the
You gotta
youth
get your
getting
hands dirty.
That's right.
involved.
Well, as far as third parties are concerned, there's the one I talked to Michael Feinstein,
Yeah, I know.
who is he's been in the Green Party here in California since the
He was the mayor
1990s.
of
He was the
Santa
mayor
Monica.
of Santa Monica. Over 1,000.
Not the
people-
piano player.
No, not the different guy. Different guy. Yeah, yeah, yeah. People ask me that too, like, oh, the piano player. No, this is a different guy. He says that over 300 Greens have been elected to local offices in California alone, over 1,000 nationwide since the 90s. And they do have, here and now, an infrastructure in place. Where, as you mentioned earlier, it's outrageous to have so much money just to get somebody on the ballot. What is that about?
Huh. That's ballot access. In the 1890s, I think through the Australian ballot, it came about where they decided we're going to require a certain amount of signatures for candidates to get on the ballot.
Yeah.
And it just sometimes, or often, or pretty much always, is more signatures for third parties and independent candidates. So that's
Yeah.
more of the stranglehold, the rigged system that, yes, Trump and Sanders touched into, but they didn't go into it.
Yeah.
And so
Yeah.
back into the voting methods, the ballot access, the closed presidential debates, the
Yep.
commission on presidential debates, and so on, gerrymandering. These are things that we will fix. We have to. The latter's not an option.
Well,
It's not.
it's so the discussion about alleged rigging, like for instance of the primary, 2016, the Democratic primary. I mean, what do you call superdelegates, for instance? Just that concept alone. How can you say that I'm voting before the actual election happens? It doesn't make any sense. And what is your take on that?
Well, that's a good, well, if you're super, you gotta flaunt it.
Yeah, I guess so. Like a superhero, right?
Gotta show who you
Yeah.
Why I oughta.
are. Who else is gonna call him super?
That's right.
I mean, when the election's over, they're gonna forget about the super. They're gonna,
Well, back like in
So
19
superinflated egos,
Superinflated
too.
egos.
I took a pass, didn't I?
Ego needs
Well,
to.
well, you can go all the way back to like 1944 with Henry Wallace, who was.
Oh, what a hatchet job they did on him.
Yeah, I know. Right?
God, yeah.
And of course,
The other thing is, Lincoln was the first Republican ever elected, right?
yeah, that's right, that's right.
Before that, it was the Whigs.
And just because Henry Wallace was a socialist and a pacifist, the business people that made the atomic bomb were thinking, oh, well, we can't test this now if we have a president that's a pacifist. What do you think about that? That's a historical thing that we didn't get in school. But if you think about
That's
it,
not an actual quote you gave us.
what's that?
That's not an actual quote you gave us.
A quote? No. But he was a pacifist.
I know he was a
Yeah.
president, and he was a wonderful progressive.
Yeah, yeah.
But I don't know that the fascists did say we can't have policy.
Oh, yeah, yeah.
Passive.
We can't say it's a quote. Yeah, yeah.
So doesn't that point to the idea that we've had a structured kind of duopoly of power between the Democrats and Republicans?
Well, it's the same thing as has always existed in Latin America.
Yeah.
You had the liberals or the conservatives,
Right.
and they both committed unspeakable acts, but it was okay because they were doing it.
But even in American political history, you look at Democrat and Republican, even in foreign policy, liberal or conservative, during the Cold War era, the Red Scare, they were very close together, even up to today, if you look from a foreign policy point of view. And as I think you rightly said in the conference, regardless of the gentleman's response about Uber on this, there is truth that we are an empire.
Yeah.
That is on the record, even the New York Times says so, which is not maybe a very proud thing, because by definition, empires are they're anti-democratic. So we have a contradiction.
This is Nice Wonder. You're watching The NOWMAN Show, Arete Media News.
And I think we're on the decline, don't you?
Yeah, it looks like all the numbers are in there, Cliff. All the numbers are there.
Economically.
We'll probably create World War
All of the numbers.
It's not a permanent.
So whenever we are ready, I can start.
Well, it could be a
But we're gonna
decline
get out
before
of
a
it.
rise, depending on what the transition.
We have to get out of it.
It all depends
You're
on
talking about a transition, even though there is a.
Thank you so much. Let me make sure it's Ajitesh. AJ? So that's all you want me to say is just AJ? Okay. What's your degree in here?
Computer science PhD.
Computer science PhD. Okay. Okay. And then when I talk to you afterwards, we can see what I'm going to do. I'm going to move this chair out of the way. I'm going to move the thing, and we're just going to be real spontaneous. Actually, Eric, can you hear me?
Yes, I can hear you.
Do we want to rehook this Shure microphone up for so when we're ready to do the comedy, then I can just pull the mic stand in here for him,
potential bill
or how do we do that?
in the Congress. And it has enormous numbers of supporters. Both houses.
When he comes in to do the comedy, I can move the chair back and we can pull the mic stand in.
Pushes
Oh. Okay.
Right, to make it a felony.
So-
Apparently, an argument.
So is the cord still there? Oh, I see what you're saying. Okay. I see it. Oh. Yeah, we could actually put it on the stand, and when I'm done reading this news, because his thing is towards the end of the news segment, so I can move the chair out of the way, and then pull the mic stand over here, and then I can do the interview, that way.
What do they require to do with that money? By our military?
Wouldn't that be another form of money in politics, though?
And,
Now would be engaged
I mean, either way is fine.
and foreign policy infused together.
Is that okay? To make it simple.
So you want me to 5 minutes of stand-up and then maybe we'll talk?
Yeah, is that good?
Yeah.
Is that good?
Yeah.
Okay.
So please
Take
use
care of our
my
economy
stage name.
and
AJ,
get out
because
of the
I have a bit
empire
of a
business.
name.
But you have
Oh, okay.
business connections and businesses because we're a globalized economy.
Oh, your
And
routine.
you got some very big powerful
Okay,
players.
I see. And
And it's
you're who
actually
better to
reveals
do it
itself
than
through
you?
Trump
Yes.
His rhetoric was what?
That's how we're just America.
Bring jobs back.
Yes, I
to
know.
America.
How can you?
And he played kind of.
And now we'll do a little Bollywood dance. Hey!
when in fact,
We might do that.
he's
I mean,
kind of-
because I'm a serious guy, but I also am not. Right?
So we're,
It doesn't
What's
even
that?
his people well.
we're in an age of irony. We're in an age
Essentially,
of
is it?
contradiction
And now,
that leads to the
let's have some comedy, ladies and gentlemen. A USC computer science PhD, who is also a comedian. Please welcome AJ. Yeah, it'll be that simple. And then you'll come up and what I'll do is I'll move the chair.
And eventually people realize that those smaller parties become larger, they inevitably become infiltrated. So,
We don't have time for that.
the party, I mean,
We're running out of time. We know
Yeah.
a lot of people.
And it might be less serious when you mix it up. You know what I mean? Just like. Yeah. Science can be funny too.
Oh, yes. That's why I'm in it. Yeah, exactly.
94%.
I took this class, robotics, only because I thought the professor was German. Really? And I just took it for pitch. I have nothing to do with robotics. Like, you know, my research has nothing to do with
two
robotics.
economists that work
because I
with
thought the
Obama.
professor was fun.
So
I'll take that class.
they're not, you know, they're
That's
admitting
great.
that.
That's fantastic. See, you can mention that.
And
So we have a lot of spontaneity on this show. You know. Even these scripts I often don't even look at them. I'm going to be looking at this more than I look at any script because it's a news segment.
Davos, Switzerland.
You know what I mean? And this is mainly a prop.
Last year,
Literally. I mean,
show.
But this is a news segment, so since this is something new for me, I'm not used to reading, literally reading.
You don't have a table, right? Use Mixtape.
This is our first experiment. Like we're going to look for like
Nothing's
backgrounds
being
that
done.
look like
There's no discussion about
Young Turks or something, or
Okay.
CNN. We'll, you know, make it
What
look
do you think
like
about-
news. This is our first experiment with this style of show. Because my company, we might create a second program, which is a news show. So and then I would be one of the reporters.
People in office. I don't
I
trust
would be
anything
the
that
only one.
Congress pushes through or tries to push through or gridlock. I
gotta
just
start
don't
somewhere,
trust
so I
the
thought, why
people
not?
that are in
Thank you
office
for-
right now. Who follow the money
Yeah.
and they care about
Mix it up
money
a
and
little bit, you
themselves
know.
more than we the people.
I think it addresses
So
a very
it's a
important
great.
issue.
All right, guys, are we ready?
We can talk
So we're starting now?
We're going to start as soon
That's what they want.
Cliff is ready, the director.
Designing how we
And then what you can do is you can have a seat anywhere here, and then just kind of
change their words or promises. That's the system we have.
That's a
Once they get
problem.
elected,
That's a huge
they jettison the voter and then kind of go on autopilot. and
I
create-
mean, term limits is definitely something that would probably, with accountable people in office, let's serve one term. It's a duty. It's not going to be. It's going to be a tough job. Not big money pension payouts, which is the way it is currently and shouldn't be. These multi-million-dollar gold semi-plated whatever pensions are definitely a big reason why we're in a deficit
Yeah,
too.
and the corporate
so.
subsidies that, and the people, like, for instance, if Obama had given everybody $30,000 instead of bailing out the banks, we'd be in a whole different situation right now. You know, and I want to wrap this up. We've got about a couple of minutes or so. I think a long-term solution, which your view on this, is the workers taking ownership of the means of production, whether that's factories, offices, stores.
What society did that work in before?
Are we ready to roll?
And why wasn't it maintained? It was
Yeah.
practically input, wasn't it?
Well,
in Italy right
in
now.
Basque region, Spain,
Yeah.
Catalan is most
Yeah.
famous.
Right.
Which was successful actually,
That's
because that
right.
was obviously during the height of the Civil War. too.
That's right. That's
But
right.
right now, Mondragon in Basque right now is a multi-billion-dollar up and running
Yeah.
community. It's like a federation of co-ops.
And they have
Mondragon?
Mondragon in Spain, in Basque.
Basque
In fact,
region
there's a
of
USA version. I believe the United Steelworkers are working with them to
Yes,
bring it to the
that's
United
right.
States.
They're working with, and they also have joint projects with Microsoft as
Right.
well as General Motors, and they right now have over 75,000 people in their cooperative total. Hundreds of companies. They have a university, a bank, an IT department. Italy actually has the most cooperatives because the government actually has a more plural law that they offer support for people to help them create the worker cooperatives. So guess what? They have the most. So it can be done, and
There's no political will.
that's right.
Like everything else.
And Democracy at Work is the organization now that's working to create that advocacy and encourage people to create those groups. So
Well, solutions-wise, we were at the beginning in this, before we went on the air, you talked about the youth, right? And
quickly, how can we get
solutions
the youth engaged?
Because, we can talk all these problems all day long, but what do we do to fix it? I mean, I don't know about you, but I am tired of the problems.
Well, let's
that we're not-
continue this conversation in another interview.
Sure. And briefly, the 18 to 28-year-olds are the game changers.
That's
And
right.
when they come out, you have no jobs, you have nothing to do, you have low paying, right?
Yes.
You're saying, run for office. I ran for Secretary of State at 27 years of age
Great.
for California, and you can run,
That's right.
anyone can
And
run.
we all can run.
They're the ones that are going to come out, I foresee, and vote like they never have before. And how's that going to happen? Dr. Ron Paul once said, I like to switch his quote around, finally. If we're ever going to bring about revolutionary changes, I like to drop the R and say evolutionary changes. Two things would need to be involved. The youth and music.
I like
That that's what's going to happen.
I like that.
United we stand.
That works with me.
Festival music is the key. That energy, that frequency that brings us all together. Let's make it fun to run for office and get engaged and become informed and educated. So, any more words, Ed?
Final thought, Ed?
No, not listening.
Well, thank you so much, George Kallas, Christina, Tobin, Ed Asner. This is Nice Wonder. You've been watching the NOWMAN Show at Politicon.
Hello, this is Nice Wonder, and you're watching the NOWMAN Show, Arete Media News. And we are live on YouTube. First of all, green festivals. Unfortunately, they will not be happening in 2017. The NOWMAN Show has covered that event 2 years in a row. When you go to their website now, greenfestivals.org, here is what it says. Quote, after passionately serving the green movement, promoting sustainable change, and seeking with great effort to build a more resilient, compassionate world, we deeply regret to inform you and our supporters, followers, and communities that Green Festivals, Inc., the Green Festivals Expo, will currently be canceling all scheduled trade shows. We've been very thankful and honored to work in cooperation and communion with each one of our like-minded associates who are fighting for a better world. Everyone, our employees, vendors, presenters, and sponsors made notable and distinguished contributions to the change that we and they wish to see in the world, helping to make Green Festivals, Inc. a uniquely inspiring and impactful event. We would like to encourage you all to continue your journey towards achieving a more sustainable future, as we still wholeheartedly believe in each organization and each individual's dedicated efforts and responsibility to make positive change, and every step counts, end quote. Best regards, Green Festivals Incorporated. But some great news, actually. August the 8th, 2017, marked the broadcast of the 800th episode of Brad Freeman and Desi Doyen's audio podcast series called The Green News Report. It is a 6-minute-long environmental news segment that focuses on green stories, and chances are, if you haven't heard, those stories haven't come through mainstream media sources. It's syndicated on many stations around the country, and you can hear it on bradblog.com, also KPFK 90.7 FM in the Los Angeles area. Millions of people in the U.S. alone have not recovered from the economic crash in 2008. Most of the jobs created are still either part-time or temporary gigs or full-time low-wage jobs, while most people still live in urban areas. What is the solution for more job creation? Worker cooperatives. Do you want to learn more about the worker cooperatives? Well, the NOWMAN Show does have a new series on the basics of worker cooperatives. And stay tuned for parts 2 and 3 coming up in future episodes. Professor Richard Wolff has co-created Democracy at Work, which is an advocacy group to educate and promote worker self-directed enterprises. His website and the group's website is democracyatwork.info. Here in Southern California, there are 3 groups in Los Angeles, San Diego, and Pasadena. Look for us on Facebook and on websites online. And speaking of websites, coming soon, of course, for more information as well, will be the NOWMANShow.com website, as well as Democracy at Work San Diego.org and Democracy at Work Pasadena.org. And, of course, the democracyatwork.info is already out there. In entertainment and other entertainment news, the Aladdin Sane Tour is happening in the UK this summer, featuring one of our guests on the show coming up very soon. Part 2 will be our tribute to David Bowie with his piano man Mike Garson. But he's on tour right now with members of Iggy Pop's band, playing the whole Aladdin Sane album and more Bowie hits. Also, Roger Waters has been in the U.S. on tour. The name of his tour is the Us and Them Tour. Of course, that comes from the Dark Side of the Moon album. With a new album that he has promoting, Is This the Life We Really Want? Queen and Adam Lambert are on tour promoting the 40th anniversary of the album News of the World. The biopic Bohemian Rhapsody is being produced with Robert De Niro's Tribeca Film Company, directed by Mark Singer and starring Rami Malek as Freddie Mercury. And speaking of Rami Malek, my current favorite television series is Mr. Robot, which stars Rami Malek, Christian Slater, and so many more great actors, and it begins season 3 in the fall of 2017. Now, for those of you not familiar with the series, it's the story of a computer hacker by the name of Elliot Alderson, who is played by Rami Malek, along with a hacktivist group that includes Mr. Robot, played by Christian Slater, and Elliot's sister Darlene, played by Carly Chaikin, who are all determined to take down the huge multinational E, or as they like to call it, Evil Corporation. Of course, it is a lot more complicated than that, so you just have to find online or on DVD to understand what I'm talking about. During season 2, we see the chaos unfolding after the first phase of the economic takedown has begun and the second phase is put into place. Season 3 will introduce 2 new characters, and according to anonymous content, The NOWMAN Show learned that every episode will be directed by the show's creator and writer, Sam Ishmael, who says that Season 3 will explore each character's motivation and the disintegration between Elliot and Mr. Robot. Sam Ishmael also said in June 2017 that he thinks there will be 5 seasons, meaning Season 3 is the middle season. The new trailer for Season 3 was captioned, "The old world is dead, and it's time to create a new one." And along with images taken from the new season, you will hear some of the lyrics from the late Leonard Cohen's masterpiece song, Democracy, recited as a poem. Yes, indeed, Democracy is coming to America, and the debut will be October the 11th on the USA Network. Now, I have a special guest in the audience right now, and he is a USA. Yeah, well, yeah, I guess he's in the USA. He is a USC computer science PhD student, and his name is AJ. Please welcome AJ.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you.
Well, it's good to be here. Until 4 years ago, I used to be in India, and I used to perform in front of 2,000, 3,000 people, which in India means only your immediate family. Yes, so I came to the US 4 years ago to pursue my PhD in computer science at USC, but I do have an ulterior motive. You know, like everyone in LA, I want to make it to Hollywood. If I don't make it to Hollywood, I do have a plan B. Plan Bollywood. Now, for those who don't know what Bollywood is, I'll give you a typical 1980s Bollywood film. The hero is dancing with the villagers because that's what we do in India in our free time. When we're not fixing your computers. Yeah, so the hero is dancing with the villagers, and that's when the villain comes in with a gun. By the way, this is how gunshots sound like in Indian movies. Most of us Indians, we don't know how a gunshot sounds like because we have been deceived by Bollywood. You know, we could be in the middle of a bank robbery. Everybody be cool to robbery! Excuse me, sir. Sorry to interrupt your robbery, sir, but I don't think your gun is real. It's supposed to make this sound, but it's making this sound. Fake gun, sir, fake gun. Oh, really? He killed me with a fake gun. Another thing that comes from India is difficult names. Now, my name is AJ, which is obviously my fake name. It happens to be my Starbucks name. My real name is Ajitesh, which is difficult to pronounce if you're not from India. So when I first came to the US, people would ask me my name, and I would tell them Ajitesh, and they would go, Ashtash, is that right? Ashtash? And I go, yeah, that works. Wait, I want to get the pronunciation right. I really want to get the pronunciation right. I said, no, you want to get the pronunciation right. Difference. But yeah, it used to be very painful initially when there were like two people trying to pronounce the name, and they were both wrong, and I would become like James Dean. You're tearing me apart. You say one thing, she says another, then everybody switches back again. But after that pain turned into disappointment, and I became Marlon Brando from Godfather. What have I ever done to you that you treat me with such disrespect? So yeah, I grew up doing impressions, if you have not noticed yet. And yeah, I grew up in India, and now I'm in a completely different country on the other side of the world. And it's amazing that there's some voices that you and we both recognize. Like we all know Shaggy from Scooby-Doo. Scoob, are you scared? Scooby-Doo from Scooby-Doo. No, Shaggy, I'm not scared. Scooby-Doo. Scrappy-Doo from Scooby-Doo. Da-da-da-da-da, puppy power. Most useless character. Dexter from Dexter's Lab. Dee, don't push the button. Dexter from the TV show Dexter. Tonight is the night. And it's going to happen again. Matthew McConaughey from True Detective. Time is a flat circle. We'll do this over and over and over. Again and again and again. Jerry Seinfeld. What is the deal? I know. I mean, that's right. What's the deal with comedians? They're doing impressions. They have no jokes. No jokes. Chris Rock. Saying what is the deal? Chris Rock. Nah, the question is, I'm gonna tell you, I'm gonna let it out. The question is, what is the deal? And finally, this is my impression of Jim Carrey doing an impression of Jerry Seinfeld. What is the deal? What is the deal? Thank you very much.
Thank you, AJ. That was fantastic. So, hold on a second here. All right. So, how long have you been doing stand-up comedy?
About 2.5 years, I would say. And before this, I used to be a part of a sketch comedy club in India, and so I did that for 4 years.
Oh, really? In Calcutta?
Well, Calcutta is where I grew up, but then I went to college in a small town called Pilani.
Now, for those of us that might not be familiar with the geography of India, where is that? Is that north, south, east, west?
This is northwest, in a state called Rajasthan.
So is Calcutta in the south?
Calcutta is east.
East. Okay. I get all confused. And Bollywood is in Madras is in the south, right?
Madras is in the south. Yes. Okay. Yes.
Yeah,
that's all you need to know.
That's all you need to know, right? Just know how to dance. Like, hey.
That's exactly.
So I'm going to go find the villain, but before we do, let's dance. Yeah, and I notice how that is. Oh my, that's one of my impressions. Can you know who that is?
No.
Did you ever watch? You didn't get Star Trek in India?
We did, but I didn't. I was more of a Doctor Who guy.
Oh, really?
Yes.
Oh, cool. Which one? There's like, 15 or something?
Which Doctor you mean?
Yeah, I know, right?
Yeah, I think my favorite is 11th Doctor.
Oh, really? I think I remember Tom. What's his name? Tom.
Are you talking about the earlier series? Yeah, I haven't seen that. I've seen the newer one.
The new ones, yeah, there's a lot, and it's a lot of fun. So, do the Marlon Brando impersonation.
I'll do the music. You need the background music to be Marlon Brando. So you be Marlon Brando, I'll be the music.
So, let me tell you something now. You know, because when you can't always speak softly, you know what I'm talking about when there's things you got to talk about, you know? But sometimes, you know, you hear this music in the background and you're thinking the only thing you can think about is like, can I get a glass of wine here? You know what I'm talking about? Because I feel so soft. Yeah, that was fun. That was good. Yeah. So now you're currently going to school. You're not working.
Yes, I am working in the sense I'm a research assistant, but that's affiliated with my student status at USC.
So what is it that you're actually researching?
Multiple things, but I mostly work with social networks, social influence, and also data mining, text mining. So most of my work has been on social influence of how things spread on a network. So something like how a meme would spread, or how a disease would spread, how opinions spread, or how two opinions compete.
Wow, opinions and memes and diseases are kind of three different things, right?
Yes, but a lot of probabilistic models of how they spread, because these are all something that's spread due to some form of interactions, and interactions are probabilistic. So all of these sort of come within the same models.
That's fascinating. So when you actually finish your degree, you're going to have a computer science degree in...
Well, it's still called PhD in computer science, Doctor of Philosophy in computer science. But I've done enough courses to be to have the degree in Masters in Intelligent Robotics. Although I don't work with robotics.
Yeah.
But a lot of people, I would have this debate with people, and they would say, "Oh, robots are going to take over the world." And I would say, no, that's not going to happen, at least in the next 1,000 years. And they would say, oh, what do you know? You're a social network guy. You're not a robotics guy. So I thought I would just go ahead and get a degree in intelligent robotics.
Well, we're definitely going to see, the increase of automation here very soon. Wouldn't you agree?
Yeah, that's true. But, it's supposed to be helping society and not killing humans.
That's right. And we should be sharing in the ownership of it, in my opinion.
Yeah. And there are tasks that are more effectively done by artificial intelligence. And that is where artificial intelligence will be involved. And there are things where we're better and will be better at them. Yeah.
That's fantastic. Well, AJ, thank you so much for being on the NOWMAN Show. Would you come back when we do a comedy show again sometime?
Oh, definitely.
Oh, thank you so much. Ladies and gentlemen, this is AJ on the NOWMAN Show News. Thank you so much, AJ. So, to finish this particular segment, thank you again for watching on YouTube Live, those of you watching. And we're going to end this segment before we take a break, and we bring in the podcasters from The Future is a Mixtape. We'll have some interesting nerdy discussion, which will continue. But before we do that, I want to give a shout out to the ADA.org, which is Americans for Democratic Action. And this next clip that we're going to be ending this segment with is from them. This is journalist Greg Palast, who wrote for Rolling Stone and also The Guardian. He's the guy that basically uncovered the stories about the voter fraud, particularly with the Republican Party's cross-check software program. And this is a segment where he's talking about this and other stories that he reported as an investigative reporter for the Rolling Stone magazine and also for The Guardian. So until next time, which stay online, watch 2 more episodes of the NOWMAN Show live. This is Nice Wonder for the NOWMAN Show, Arete Media News. And now, here is Greg Palast.
I was supposed to be an investigative reporter, not if you grew up in Sun Valley, Chicano neighborhood, where you're supposed to go to Vietnam. And I would have followed that path, but then by accident I hit this radio station called KPFK. And they, there was going to be a meeting of a group called the Americans for Democratic Action to protest the war. So I went, okay? And it was a bit unusual because at that time, most of the members of ADA, unlike here tonight, most members of the ADA joined when Eleanor Roosevelt was thinking of becoming First Lady. So there was, it was either no hair or gray hair, right? But the other thing that got me there is that there was a new group out that was going to open up the act, just like the billionaires here, called Steppenwolf. And so they were like, so it was like, heading down the highway, no adventure. And then, as they're trying to complete their set, the head of the ADA, a guy named Alan Cranston. Some people know, yeah, he was the Bernie Sanders of his day. And Alan, and he said, he stopped Steppenwolf and said, I think this is a little inappropriate for this audience. But it wasn't. That's what we all need. We're all born. Anyway, so I ended up, thank you, ADA, because you won the war. And Johnson didn't. Let's not forget. And the action part of it. Many investigations, including, for example, the Exxon Valdez investigation. I went up to Alaska. I found out that it wasn't some drunk skipper who ran into a rock. Exxon had turned off, and I kid you not, had turned off the radar on the Exxon Valdez on its maiden voyage because it was too expensive to operate. I can't make that up. But I couldn't get it in the U.S. press. I was there, again, cursing in the darkness. And then I did some other investigations. Harvey knows, Harvey Wassman there, I investigated nuclear plants for the U.S. Justice Department, racketeering and fraud. Ran a racketeering and fraud investigation, uncovered, among other things, that the builder of the nuclear plant at Shoreham, New York, here at San Onofre, and at a place called Fukushima, Japan, that they had faked something called the SQ, seismic qualifications. As it turns out, those plants cannot withstand an earthquake. That was a report, an investigation I made in 1988. By the way, put it in front of a jury. They charged the nuclear industry with racketeering. The jury gave us $4.8 billion judgment, which political manipulation eliminated. We had that report on these plants cannot withstand an earthquake, again at Fukushima. I tried to get into the American newspapers, and I ended up just cursing in the darkness again. This went on until finally I was about 43, I got a call at 4 a.m. from a newspaper in Britain, The Guardian, which said, we want you over right now. We need this investigation, your investigations. And so I showed up in London, they gave me a hat. I'm an investigative reporter. Right after that, BBC Television hired me to do the same. And I was doing several investigations. One of them was the night of the election in 2000, November 2000. I'm watching TV. I'm living in London now. My kids are getting these upstairs, downstairs accents. But what I'm seeing is black people coming before the cameras and saying, I couldn't vote. The black people, what is going on? And I'm thinking, in my conspiracy nut mind, you know, I'm called a conspiracy nut. That always gets a laugh from the conspirators. Oh wait, I'm going to stop right here because this is Gilbert from DSA, and he was really upset with me because he said, you won't say you're a socialist. And so tonight I want to admit that this year I've become a card-carrying socialist. Here it is. This is my Medicare card. This is my Medicare card. There are millions of us card-carrying socialists. Thank you, Eleanor Roosevelt. Now, so I'm looking, I'm seeing all these black people come in front of the camera, and the conspiracy nut mind of mine, I'm thinking, there must be some computer program that's just erasing the names of black people off the voter rolls of Florida. And sure enough, this is from the computer, Catherine Harris's computers, their secret list of voters. And by the way, it says BLA, BLA, BLA. What race could that? What are these voters? I actually, when I saw that, I kid you not, I thought blah blah blah. That's what I thought. I said, what is blah blah? Why are all these voters blah blah? We can laugh, except the punchline of that joke, by the way, is George W. Bush. And so he won Florida supposedly by 537 votes, but 56,000 black people were removed from the voter rolls because they were called, on this list, they were called felons. And exactly 0 were ex-cons. Their only crime was voting while black in America. And this list, okay, here's an example of the black person. There was a guy convicted named John Fitzgerald Jackson, and who was black. And the voter who lost his vote, the same guy, right? Because his name is Johnny Jackson Jr., right? Same voter? Because, Jackson's not a common name. Republican. But throughout, not one legal voter. I got these lists. How? From you. Well. If you see the film, you know that one of these hats actually really does have a camera in it. This one? Now, did the Jeb Bush himself know about this? I got a tip from the little birdie. I have this little birdie, fantastic. And he comes and he drops little documents. And I was told Dan Rather wanted to do this story for CBS because I was cursing in the dark again from London on BBC television, the top of the nightly news. This is how the American election was stolen. The front page of the Guardian newspapers and every paper in the Western world was my story covered on the front page, except it bounced off the electronic Berlin Wall here in America, which was still in the dark. I was just cursing at the darkness from London. Okay? And so Dan Rather, I kid you not, his people called me up and said, we want to do this story. I said, great. Well, if you have something else, I said, Jeb Bush personally ordered the purge of black people. I said, how do you know that? There's a document. There's a document, and I've been given the date. It's September 18th, 2000. And Catherine Harris's office, get that document, you got your new story. And they didn't run the story the next day. Run it the next day. I said, what happened? Where's the story? And they said, Greg, we checked it out, and Mr. Kallas doesn't stand up. I said, what do you mean it doesn't stand up? Call Jeb Bush's office. They said he didn't do it. I said, oh my God, I didn't think of that. Called Jeb Bush's office and Catherine Harris' office. I understand there's a document from the Governor Bush directing you to remove from the voter rolls, which is, by the way, but there's a document. Could you send that to me? Congress wants me to have it. 15 minutes later, in my fax machine, I put that, the nightly news BBC, every paper in the world except in the United States, it was lost. So once again, I'm cursing in the darkness. And, okay, so that's it, right? Everything. You can disband Americans for Democratic Action now. 2017. Hillary was wrong, but you heard Hillary Clinton. She said, American candidate for president never challenged the sanctity and veracity of the vote. Okay, never. She also said, by the way, in 2000, she did say that the vote in 2000 in Florida, and she'll never forget it. Amnesia, it happens. And what happened? Here's what happened. Okay, now we've got this. What happened was, in 2016, I did an engagement with Rolling Stone magazine. I fly out the United States through, like ERP, run, roll, and this guy that he calls Agent Orange, who says 3 million people in America voted twice. 3 million people in America are voting what Trump said. He picked that up from, he picked it up from a guy named Chris Cole. You don't know it's fine, just KKK. And this guy, the Secretary of State of Kansas said 3 million people apparently were ready to vote twice, and they did. Okay? Now, 3 million people voting twice. no American journalist asked for the list of people. I did. Now, I have to say that they don't give it to me. They said, there's no way you can get this list of double voters because that's a felony crime. And this is a felony.
The NOWMAN Show, and I am here live on YouTube with Matt Snyder and Jesse Herring.
Hello.
And thank you guys for being on the NOWMAN Show. They are the creators and the producers and performers, I guess you could say, of the podcast, The Future is a Mixtape. Yeah. So on your website, you have that it's a podcast that hopes to move away from the postmodern and morbid condition of constantly poking at the corpse of capitalism and our dystopian landscape, and instead aims to open up discussion on actual solutions to the overwhelming problems facing our dying Earth.
Boy, aren't there some overwhelming
Oh
problems.
my gosh.
Tremendous.
Well, so we can get to know you guys a little bit first, because we got a lot to talk about. Matt, now you are involved in education?
Yeah, I teach at the University of California at Riverside. I teach in the University Writing Program, which is a separate program / department that does composition, rhetoric, argumentation.
Oh, that's fantastic.
But my degree, my PhD is actually at the English department at UCR. So,
oh, wow.
so I actually was hired within the university, which is unusual.
Yeah, so it's your alma mater. Mm-hmm. Yeah. So now, Jesse, you're from California.
Yeah. Well, I'm originally from Pacific Northwest, but I was born in Whittier, California.
Oh.
And then my family moved because they wanted to actually be able to afford a house, because even then owning a house was something that was hard to do in LA. So we moved up to the Pacific Northwest, and then I went to school at Western Washington University where I met Jesse.
Oh.
And then I went to grad school at UC Riverside.
Oh, I see.
And then just have now been here literally for 17 years. So,
oh, wow.
So I've yet to visit the hospital where I was born, but I've been told I was born in Whittier, California.
Oh, wow. That's Richard Nixon's hometown.
Oh, yeah. I haven't gone to the library yet.
Yeah, me either. Now, Jesse, you're originally from Alaska, right?
Yes, I was born in Alaska, but Matt and I met, like you said, in college, where we both went to Western Washington University. I was there studying fine arts, I, as a young person, knew that I was destined to be an artist.
Yeah.
And so I was on a path to become an artist, and I crossed paths with Matthew and other friends that we made from Washington, a group of folks that he grew up with in Eastern Washington, and that was about 20 years ago. And Matt and I have been engaged in these vigorous discussions about what the future ought to look like for a couple decades now, but in the way that you do as adult friends, right? Which is every few months, 3 or 4 months or 6 months that we see each other, it's like, we should do this more often.
Yeah.
So
that's basically how the podcast got started.
It's just basically we'd go to a concert, a show, just to get together. And I had a busy life with kids and family, and we'd get together and we'd have these explosive conversations, right? And people would come over, like at Denny's or wherever place we're eating, and say they'd come in on the conversation because we were talking about deep core issues that people don't broach.
Yeah.
And so much of life is about small talk.
Yeah.
But small talk kind of blocks out those deep system discussions. So we were thinking, this is weird that people are like joining our conversation, and we kept saying, well, this would be great, because we were talking about podcasts, and podcasts were starting to emerge in the late 2000s, and so it was something that was on the discussion point for us, I think.
Well, that's cool. Well, going a little bit further back, let's say, because I know that, there's an appeal, there's a nerd culture, you know what I mean? And that's often how we find each other, initially when we're younger.
I played D&D.
You do that. Didn't you have comic books? And I actually brought a few comic books with me here.
That's how I learned to read, actually. I learned to read.
Can you believe this is actually a Tesla comic book?
Oh, wow.
Yeah, and can you believe that?
It's a pop culture.
And this is when I was a media ambassador for a UN program, and they made this great, they worked with is it Marvel? I guess it is. DC. No, they worked with DC to create this comic book with Superman and Wonder Woman. They're about landmines. It's really a really good educational
what I find
for
about
kids,
what I find about comic books too is like it's especially with TV culture. It allows for literacy because there's a visual element. So I actually was in remedial reading classes up until 4th grade, and comic books is actually how I learned how to read. So my worst subject as an elementary kid was actually reading, which is ironic because I have a PhD in English. But I had struggled with reading through my childhood.
Yeah, that doesn't surprise me.
No, when parents ask me, it's like, because I know I'm an English teacher, I'll say, well, look, try this, because this is a broken down film, essentially. Right. And so it works really well for reading. And so, yeah, I played D&D and was involved in nerd culture, and then felt comfortable when I started working for the high school newspaper. I went to a school called Kamaikan High School, and we had a newspaper there, and that's where I really felt rooted into kind of a beautiful nerd culture.
So did you find discover these ideas through film, through TV, through music, through books, Jesse? Or what?
Well, I think it wasn't so much nerd culture that brought the two of us together in our collaborations with this project and previous projects while we were at university. It was more art culture. He's a writer and I'm a visual artist, and we were running in the same circles and working on similar projects, and you actually collaborated with a few of our fellow art student comrades.
I did performance art for some friends at Western Washington, and we had something called Umpopta, which is like pop and Dadaism, and we had this art project. We wanted to take over the campus with this kind of emergent art project, and that was my friend Chris's idea of how to create community. But also I think when we moved from, let's say, like comic books to like a novel or deep modern art, you're engaged on a symbolic level in a much richer way than you were with comic books, where you're mostly going for entertainment and narrative. When I was getting my degree in English, it was actually through a writing concentration in poetry and fiction. So you're actually seeing how things are built.
Yes.
So seeing how narratives are built is what allows you to think and make that transition towards political transformation.
Yeah, and I know for myself personally, it was like, books like 1984 or what's it, Tolfer's
futurist books.
The
futurist
Future
books.
Shock.
Yeah, that future shock.
Yeah, those books that, and then of course, being a fan of Star Trek. And so, and then in music, like David Bowie, Space Oddity, or
Oh, and Fahrenheit 9/11 was huge for me. I don't know. I'm sorry, not Fahrenheit 9/11, but actually, the Fahrenheit 451 was really big because that was where science fiction was starting to be taught at high schools, for the first time.
That's true.
Definitely Star Trek. I think we talk about this too. It comes up a lot when we talk about visions for the future. And when we talk about what a future could look like, I think Star Trek culturally is a real key touchstone for us broadly to imagining what the future might look like in a more egalitarian way.
Yes.
Because the future that the Star Trek narrative inhabits is really a communist future.
That's true.
It's a post-scarcity world.
That's right.
And it is one where technology has been embraced. There are replicators, so we don't have to go and make all our own food and stuff. So they've moved beyond money systems. So
that's right.
For me, the next generation, so Jean-Luc Picard and the whole cast of The Next Generation, that was something that was a ritual thing every Saturday night in the late 90s as a teenager.
It's really the biggest manifestation we have in pop culture of utopia.
That's right.
But the really funny, interesting implication in this is that we never see Earth. We don't see what utopia looks like. We actually have to go onto a spaceship where we can have multiculturals and interracial kissing. But that we actually never know actually fully how the Federation functions as a system much on the first initial show. And so that shows the degree of how hard it is that we literally have to get on a spaceship to actually have communism, because we never see, Earth. Like it's talked about in almost mythological sense. Well, so that's the interesting thing about it being still the most utopian work of art that we have, but it also shows some kinds of limitations.
Well, also not only in the television series, but I think one of the
my favorite episode, I think, ended up getting sampled for in a song by a group called Information Society, Pure Energy. What's the name of that song?
I can't
remember. But
I know which one you're talking about.
The Enemy Within was the name of the episode, and I remember listening to that song like, why do I know that's Leonard Nimoy saying pure energy? And I'm going like, that's from that episode, my favorite episode. And you hear several others too, several other samples in it. You know, what's on my mind? Which I always see every time I look at Facebook. It's on what's on your mind. You know, so it's nerd. I'm a big time nerd.
But you know, I think what's interesting too is like that Star Wars became the dominant media empire for science fiction, and that shows that we want this good versus evil that's both a narrative strategy but also doesn't offer any solutions. Where Star Trek, you know, problems have mostly been solved, or you see problems being solved on the episodes. And so that speaks to the dystopian impulse that we see now, post-World War II and onward, just dystopian kind of literature, where we always need a battle again versus forces of evil and good. Whereas Star Trek implies, I think, by its very narrative trajectory, that we've solved problems on Earth, and now we're going to solve problems elsewhere.
That's right, and that we're actually moving on. We're an existing race of people that's not broken down by color and by gender and by anything. I mean, we're just our goal is literally more focused on, like you say, an egalitarian perspective.
And about exploring, about discovery.
Strange new worlds.
Exactly.
Right?
About what humans actually
could become.
That's right. That's right.
But I mean, even still, it does use as the framework this good versus evil a lot. So it falls into some of the same traps that the Star Wars universe does, and especially the newer films become much more just a bunch of CGI.
I know.
Well, I think that's the interesting thing is the Star Trek films. Essentially, the new ones are basically Star Wars light. I mean, they're based on CGI, and the marketing tools are, we've got to do what you can't do on TV in order to get people in the movie theater, and that's why CGI's taken over as the real spectacle for TV.
There was because we're going to move on to a segment here, and then that you haven't seen, so we can all comment on it. But I wanted to make one more comment about Star Trek. Gene Roddenberry also, as you know, did a TV movie called The Quester Tapes.
Oh, yeah.
And I just discovered the other day that one of our guests on the NOWMAN Show was actually in that movie, Mike Farrell. And it's about, and Roddenberry talked about the making of that film, and he said that the executives said, why would you want to make a movie about a character that's looking for his reason for existence? Seriously, this was their discussion in the boardroom.
It's hilarious because that was basically the plot for most 1970s New Hollywood films.
Right?
Was the lonely man narrative.
It's only like potentially the most human of things to think
about. I know, but seriously.
Why are we here? What is this all about?
I heard that interview once and I was like, wow, that was my wake-up call maybe to Hollywood. But right now I'm going to show you a clip. This is from Politicon last year. Of course, we've covered Politicon several years now here on the NOWMAN Show. This is comedian John Fugelsang. We're not talking about anything funny right now. In this particular segment, I'm calling it Confronting Hatred and the Golden Rule. This is John Fugelsang from Politicon.
And I totally understand why that is, because your George Carlin used to talk about that, you know, because it's frustrating to get through life, you know, without having some kind of relief or some kind of therapy.
Yeah, absolutely. And you know, for something like hate, what's stronger than ridicule? Well, guns, I guess. But for me, comedians are the best equipped to show the absurdity of hate and to show how hate makes you stupid.
You know, one of the panelists made a comment about there's no hater problem. It's a passport problem. And, you know, and I've noticed that myself, that, you know, by living overseas, it actually broadened my perspective of what the world is about and all the different kinds of people in it. And the people that I knew that didn't travel so much had a much different view. What's your take on that?
You know, that's kind of similar to something Mark Twain once said, and I do think that travel and exposing yourself to people different from yourself is the greatest antidote to hate and stupidity.
I mentioned last year, I also am a preacher's kid and grew up in an environment where there was a lot of these expectations about what reality was based on a book and a belief system, essentially, which is really not a whole lot different in some ways than political ideologies. Like if you're basing everything on that, you're not seeing a bigger picture. But
I think there's a lot of truth in the Bible, not necessarily a lot of facts, but there's a lot of truth. And the problem is when you believe that a talking snake is real, but Christ saying love your enemies was just metaphor.
Good point. Because I always felt like that was the most important part of the Bible, and it's amazing to me how some people just, they marginalize that. And that, to me, that's the most important part.
Jesus did reduce the 10 Commandments to 2.
That's right. And if you did follow those 2, then everything else just kind of falls in place,
Yeah, kind of. I mean, the essential message of all the great religions is don't be a dick.
Yeah, that's pretty much it. I mean, that's right,
So that sums up religion. Don't be a dick.
Or the supposed idea of it, right?
Yeah, right.
But we'll go
exactly.
to these to kind of figure things out. And in some ways, I had a scholar had said that aliens are a metaphor for God.
Oh, really?
Yeah, it's a really thoughtful thing to think about. Well, our exploration of aliens has a lot to do with a way of shaking out what we think God might be. If there is one, that's what other manifestation do we have? And those anxieties about the inability to imagine alien life, which often looks humanoid, and the inability to imagine what if there was a God or is a God, what that looks like is part of that grappling point.
Yeah, I know. And dealing with, right now, obviously, we see growing fascism in our world right now because of the, we can get into that in much more detail going on even into the next segment. But it's obvious that there's, the economic downturn has a lot of impact on people. And even though these are not new issues, it brings it out more because people are frustrated with their personal situations. That they want to put food on the table, they want to, be able to pay their bills or whatever, and it just plays into that problem. What are your thoughts?
Well, I think in many cases the racial scapegoating is easier to pull in as a narrative when solving with solutions is so hard, and there's so few solutions being offered by the left, at least in a visible sense, that we're allowing the motive for racial scapegoating to accelerate. So when people make comparisons to the Weimar Republic and to Hitler and the rise of the Third Reich, there's some reason we can make those analogies. Because racial scapegoating is a mechanism that happens when capitalism is not working for people and it's getting worse every day. And it allows for a really easy answer when people desire certainty. The first episode of our podcast is called The Desire for Certainty, which is an exploration on religion. But the desire for certainty is a profound desire humans have at a core being, is wanting to understand from curiosity what the world should look like. So that desire for certainty is not just a question of religion, but also, I think, a question of economics. Like, I need something certain in my life. And at least if I blame immigrants and folks of color, that provides certainty even if it's not true.
That's right, and it becomes more complicated. I mean, distractions, when they're actually based on real things, it makes the situation much more complicated. You know what I mean? And that's I think what's happened in this culture. We really have to get to the nitty gritty.
Yeah, and this personal experiences with religion are part of what has given shape to our conversations, the conversations that Matt and I have had over the years, and that has served as the basis for this new podcast project. And like you said, the first episode talks about these, and we reflect in that episode on our own personal experiences with religion, and then move into tying how those frameworks for explaining the unexplained parts of the universe and of our world and our experience therein are indicative of newer frameworks of oppression and of idol worship that we see in the systems of capitalism and heightened by the neoliberal version of capitalism, and that are creating a confusing world that we all live in, where we're not dealing with real human issues, because, and we were talking about this before this discussion, how other countries, the Nordic countries, are having debates about the particularities of homeschooling, or in the UK this year having debates about parking fees for their national health
for
system.
universal health care,
Right.
where they're essentially gluing the parking meters, because not only do they not have to worry about copays or deductibles, but they also they're gluing the meters so that they can have free parking for the disabled and elderly, because it's inhibiting them from getting health care. That's a debate that I wish we were having in this country.
That's right. Because of the social safety nets, that's the term it's used here.
Right.
You know, and it's also called welfare.
Right.
When welfare, you know, doesn't
everybody want welfare? I mean, don't we all want welfare?
Like, what do you call bailing out banks and corporate subsidies?
Yeah.
You know, or you know what I mean? Why isn't that called welfare in this country?
Well, it's what Noam Chomsky says: socialism for the rich, privatization for the poor.
That's right.
And that's
or rugged capitalism.
Oh yeah, rugged individualism. Yeah, you pull yourself out of the bootstraps, but my kids, they got bootstraps everywhere. They're all over the house. You know, in bank accounts and everything. So yeah, absolutely. So this idea of welfare should be a foundational aspect of being human and loving each other. So that's what the phrase we come up with as an idea shape is called the golden square, which is that.
What is that?
Well, the golden square involves this notion that we should have guaranteed rights. Now, this is different than saying access, right?
So you're not talking about the Universal Declaration of Human Rights.
We're talking about our notions of the baseline foundations for a just society. So that there should be guaranteed rights for, food, for shelter, for education, and healthcare, right? And those four things should be rights that everyone has in an egalitarian sense. Right. That shouldn't be cordoned off.
Yeah.
That we start from this point, right?
Yeah.
Because in a hunter-gatherer society, a mixtape of the past, you were guaranteed the best you could get from that society.
Yeah.
And we've moved away from that. And so you had guaranteed access, for instance, to the shaman. It wasn't particularly good medicine, but everyone in that tribal community had access to the same shaman. Suddenly, in the United States, we don't have the right to the shaman. That's absurd in a hunter-gatherer society.
I know, right?
So that's a mixtape we need to bring back in, right? We need to have the shaman back in our communities.
And our arguments are that these four things are the most essential of human rights. And these four things can create the cornerstones of a more just world. That what we experience now as the illusion of freedom, as the veneer, in this veneer of democracy, under the oppressive forces of capitalism and clearly this week of hate, right? That these four things are necessary for anybody to be free. And if we want to talk about emancipatory movements and about how we build a world, how we build a future, how we create a mixtape with love and care and compassion and empathy for each other, that we need to put these as a foundational set of principles upon which we build that future.
And we're not saying that this is utopia, that we have these four things, but we're saying this is a foundational element to move toward utopia, to move toward post-capitalism. And if you look at the 7 of 10 happiest places on Earth, they're all in the Nordic region, or Greater Scandinavia, as I call it. And they've come really close to all four of these things. And in some states, countries, they provide all of these to a 90% degree.
Yeah.
And so there's no surprise that Scandinavia continues to be ranked in the top 10 of the countries because they get these four things. They're not perfect societies. They're not utopias.
There's no such thing as a perfect society, but
Well, I think the desire for perfectibility is something we should try to use as an aiming device.
Yes.
But the fact that they hit these four things is endemic of what's wrong with the United States.
Absolutely. And the last I saw, we were number 1 in 2 areas. Can you guess what those are?
I want to say beef production. Is that one
No,
of beef?
violence.
Violence, yes.
And military budget.
Yes.
Yeah.
Of course, you know, we're #1 military budget by far.
So $600 billion. So to give you an idea of that, we could have universal education in the United States with the current expenditures of just $60 billion.
That's
so
right.
$60 billion
That's right.
would give you universal free tuition.
Free tuition. Yeah.
So that's, you know, I mean, look at the math, 600 versus 60. So we obviously have a messed up alignment in our system.
I know we have so many problems that, you know, we spend time talking about identifying what the problems are, and I when we get into the next segment, I want to do that, but I want to focus on the solutions.
Yeah.
And so in the next segment that we do, I want to talk about what is the world that we want to see. And I think that it's becoming clearer and clearer all the time, as Richard Wolff even is saying very clearly now, that we have to make a decision.
Yes.
You know, all this, you know, well, it's comfortable in the center, but the center is what drives, you know, populists to the extremes, because nothing gets done, right? So he identifies that we have to decide, are we going to go with the right-wing solutions, or are we going to go with the left-wing solutions? And we need to start taking this conversation in those directions.
Or as Buckminster Fuller put it, it's utopia or oblivion. Or as the Democratic Socialists of America would put it, it's socialism or barbarism.
And
this is
from Rosa
choice.
Luxemburg, right?
Yeah,
I mean, that's from Rosa Luxemburg. And I think that the important thing to think is that actually we should, when we talk about radical, we should talk about the center as the radical space, because they're clearly the most delusional segment of the U.S. population. And
probably the biggest.
Oh, I mean, they're blocking a real discussion of that right-left pole of discussion.
That's right.
Where we can have that. I mean, imagine if we had Donald Trump and Bernie Sanders on the stage.
Right.
You would never have seen such a battle of the 1% versus the 99% than that debate. And we didn't have it. We weren't allowed
get a chance to get
because it had to have the radical center as part of that project. And maybe the delusional center is a better term, because they're trying to buy time and it's not working. If you look at Macron in France, he's plummeted in the polling, and he's clearly unpopular, and he's not going to be able to keep the French society together.
That's right, that's right. And Theresa May also the same sort of deal, you know, which I want to talk about in the next segment too, in the Labour Party and the democratizing the economy, and there's a lot of cool stuff, and how can we make that happen?
Yes.
You know, you were talking about the dichotomy. Yanis Varoufakis, I think it was at the New School. I don't have a quote, but I can paraphrase him, and he said, we're at a point where we have to make a decision. Are we going to be subject to being the slaves to the owners of the machines, or are we going to insist that we live in a world that is like Star Trek?
Yeah.
He literally made that reference.
I mean,
we are at that point where we really, as a race, as a human race, not as a country, but as a whole planet, have to decide, what do we want here?
Space communism, please.
Yes, and I mean, and the other thing is he mentions, and that on Doug Henwood's Behind the News, is that you have, the Matrix or Star Trek. Now I would say we still have the Mad Max in play. I mean, we do it with climate change and nuclear warfare. We have Mad Max. It's always there as that third narrative. But certainly Star Trek and Matrix, with some controls on climate change and nuclear warfare to prevent those, that binary does work. But I don't want to rule out Mad Max. I mean, we have to bring that as part of the discussion.
That's true. I did like the soundtrack of that movie, though. It was actually, real quick, it was done by one of the authors of this book, which, by the way, Bang, The Complete History of the Universe, Brian May. That's Dr. Brian May, guitarist of Queen, everybody, who I would love to get on this show. If you see this, Brian, I want to talk to you. This is a great book, astronomy book. He did the music for the Road Warrior movies, you know that.
It's fantastic.
Well, let's wrap this up, gentlemen. Quickly, I want to say thank you very much for
thanks for having us.
For being on the NOWMAN Show, and it will be continued with a panel discussion. We'll bring in the NOWMAN Show Arete Media political analyst, Professor George Kallas, and we'll continue this discussion. So, Matt Snyder,
Jesse Herring, thank you very much for being on NOWMAN Show. This is Nice Wander. Hello, this is Nice Wander of the NOWMAN Show, and I'm here with Mike Garson.
Okay, sounds great.
Hello, this is Nice Wander of the NOWMAN Show, and I'm here with Mike Garson, who is a keyboardist, pianist, composer, and he is also known as a collaborator and sideman with numerous artists. In this particular episode, we're going to focus on David Bowie. Mike Garson, welcome to the NOWMAN Show.
Nice to be here.
When did you first meet David?
Met David in 1972. I've told this story a few times where I was giving a piano lesson in Brooklyn. My wife was working and the phone rings and it's David Bowie's manager, and he says, can you come down for an audition in Manhattan in 20 minutes at RCA Recording Studios? I have a daughter that's 1 year old swinging on a little swing right next to the piano, a piano student there who I just met, and I don't know who Bowie is, and they're asking me to do an audition. Okay. So it sounded interesting. So I left the piano student to babysit my daughter. My wife wanted to kill me, and she wasn't home. And I went, and Mick Ronson, the lead guitarist, was conducting the audition, and he put the music up of the David Bowie song called Changes, and I played, as I told many times, 7 or 8 seconds, and he stopped me and said, you have the gig? I said, I haven't even begun. He said, I can tell. I play the piano also. So they hired me for 8 weeks, and I managed to last there to 2006, on and off.
So that you went on tour then with the Spiders from Mars.
First American tour, we opened up in Cleveland.
The really big album that happened was the studio album. The first one was Aladdin Sane, right?
That was the first one in 1973, and that was pure luck. I get a email every day from somewhere in the world regarding that album.
So the story of Aladdin Sane, how did that come together, that song?
Well, I was in there to do an overdub, and there's a lot of this going on. So Bowie asked for a piano solo, and I played something like this. Stops me and he said, that's typical blues, we don't want that. So he says, try something else, and it goes again. So I start playing things. So playing Latin, these kind of things. And he said, that's interesting. But he said to me, I heard you played on the avant-garde scene in Manhattan, in New York, in the 60s. Can you do something like that? And my remark, of course, was, you don't want that. That's why I'm not working Saturday night, you know. He said, don't worry about it. Just do it. And it was one take. And then the band's doing this. That kind of a thing. Except they were doing that, so I had both hands to do this. But when you hear it isolated, it doesn't sound so good. He was smart enough to know if you had a solid rhythm section playing a groove, you could play this freeness on top. So that was where his brilliance lied. Because some of that music by itself doesn't make a whole lot of sense, but he framed it in this context with a bass drum and a groove and great guitar playing. That's how it happened.
And it made perfect sense.
It was one take, he loved it. A few months later, one of the newspapers in London, I don't know if it was The Guardian or the London Times, right on the top, it was a Bowie quote, and said, Mike Garson is the best rock pianist in the world because he doesn't play rock. Typical David Bowie. And I was off and running, you know, and Melody Maker, which is one of their papers over there, within a few weeks like I'm third best pianist in the world, you know, like where did that come from? Nobody knew me a few weeks earlier. I was playing in jazz clubs with 3 people there, making $5 a night.
Wow. Could you play the very beginning of Time? I've always liked that introduction you did there.
I used some stride piano from the 30s mixed with some avant-garde elements, and I think I played this.
Time. That's fantastic. So after that, Bowie did a kind of a cover tune album, right, called Pinups.
It was all English songs by English composers, and there was one by Syd Barrett that was called See Emily Play, and a wild piano solo on that I played, now that I remember.
And I really liked also the Rolling Stones Let's Spend the Night Together that you did there.
Yeah, he asked for a crazy intro on that, and I did something like that. Something like that.
See, and that's very entertaining, as well as actually there's a lot going on there. I think it's very easy to underestimate what you are creating in that moment.
That's right. There's recognition of the melody. There's counterpoint. There's jazz chords. There's virtuosity. But David was very open-minded, and he was a great artist, so he heard many things, and he knew how to pull that out of me and others. He's like a great producer, which a lot of people don't realize, and that's because he states his overall vibe or vision or concept, and then he gets out of the way and lets you do your thing, because he knows he's hired you. So everyone he's hired, Carlos, Alomar, Luther Vandross, Dave Sanborn.
Hello, this is Nice Wonder, and welcome to the NOWMAN Show. And for those of you watching on YouTube live, welcome. And in this segment, we're having a panel discussion. We're going to be focusing on envisioning a world of left politics and economics. We're going to be talking mostly about solutions to the immense problems that we have in this world today with some of the brightest minds that have been on this show. First of all, Matt Snyder and Jesse Herring, who are the creators and the hosts of a podcast called The Future is a Mixtape, and which is a podcast about that very subject, imagining what the world would look like in a utopian sense. And then also with me is my associate from Arete Media Productions, our political analyst for the NOWMAN Show, George Kallas, Professor George Kallas from San Diego. Thank you, gentlemen, for being on the show.
Yep, absolutely.
Let's get right into this. I do want to briefly, for those of you who might know the word utopia, utopian. Now, there's a great group of Todd Rundgren called Utopia, but we're not talking about that, right? We're talking about Sir Thomas More's book, right?
It was in 1516.
Wow.
So we just celebrated, the 500th year anniversary of Thomas More's Utopia. And actually at UC Riverside, we have the largest collection of utopian and space and science fiction.
Oh, really?
Yeah, at the Riverside Library at UC Riverside. So we have a huge collection, and we actually have one of the original copies of Utopia there.
Oh, really?
So it's extremely beautiful. And there's
from 1516?
Yeah, from 1516.
Wow.
And it basically, it was part of a museum gallery showing to celebrate that 500th year.
Sir Thomas More.
Yeah, and so the term utopia, if you look at the actual Latin expressions with it, it means nowhere or no place. But it's also a play or a pun because it has the sound oo, so it sounds like euphemism or good. So it can also indicate in a punny sense idea of a good place. And so there's that tension with the term. And much of the scholarship on the book is about whether or not Thomas More is being satiric, or whether he was being sincere in many of the parts of the book, because there's obviously utopian aspects and very dystopian aspects with it, and it becomes part of this burgeoning subgenre called utopian science fiction. So, and it's often schematic. So a lot of utopian science fiction often has a traveler who's coming back and telling people about this strange world or strange land. And that's a kind of element in science fiction is what you call the philosophical tradition. A microcosmos by Voltaire is also an example of that. These kind of like micro communities, and then people come back and talk about, as they're traveling, of this utopian sphere. Herland by Gilman Perkins is another example of a utopian fiction where women have an entire society that's governed by women. There's no men in existence. An earthquake breaks them off from men, and they can actually reproduce other women. And it's a matriarchal utopia. So those are some of those kinds of experiments. But Sir Thomas More is considered the beginning of this kind of subgenre. It's been kind of absent from science fiction until quite recently, until the 1970s.
Oh, really? Wow, that's interesting to know. Wow, you are certainly an expert there. Are you one of the contributors to that collection?
No, but I did a class at UC Riverside called Utopia Dystopia. So the first 5 weeks, I depressed the hell out of my students, and the next 5 weeks we read utopian novels or books. So I lifted them out of the trenches. And so it was a way of examining, I think, and also correction to the kind of huge engorgement on dystopian science fiction, that we're really being engorged by dystopian thought and dystopian writing. And it's a cheap kind of answer. And it's a debate within the science fiction community about whether or not they should go back to having those broader visions. There's a book called Hieroglyph that's part of a hieroglyph project by Neil Stephenson, and they're trying to create science fiction that's positive and provides a better future rather than dystopian future. And right now it sells books, it sells movies, but we're being drenched in it, and it's a problem.
Yeah, we are in what we've titled one of our episodes in this terminal dystopia syndrome. We have this addiction to stories about the end of the world, and as the common adage goes, it's easier to imagine than the end of the world than the end of capitalism.
Frederick Jameson.
Well, it isn't for me, but
well, not for us. Neither for us, and that's why in our project, this particular collaboration, this podcast that we produce, The Future is a Mixtape, we are overtly utopian. We are not, as in contrast to the conventional centrist left, the common democratic narratives that are afraid of utopia. Right? So the reformists are afraid of utopia because we can't. It's not achievable. Well, we've seen what happens when we don't offer visions for a better world. And so that's where we can talk about solutions. That's what we're really invested in, is talking about a vision for a better world. What are solutions to help us get there?
Well, one of the things that we have seen with capitalism is the growth of the fossil fuel industry. And now we have a crisis, an environmental crisis, like probably has never been seen in the history of this planet. So, and I mean, all the data is out there. I mean, I've had people on this show. I mean, it's not debatable anymore.
If we survive this century, they'll do a ranking of mass murders. Exxon will be at the top of the list. We're locked into mass death right now. So when the Trump election occurred, Trumpster fire started, I could see Florida turn red, and I was actually seeing the color blue because Florida's going to be underwater. It's locked.
That's right.
It's locked in. No matter what we do, half of Florida's underwater.
And a lot of these South Pacific islands probably as well.
Yes, absolutely.
So what is the solution there? I mean, if there is a solution, what is it?
Democratic socialism, at least initially, as a kind of the kind of infrastructure projects as well as reparation. Naomi Klein's book, This Changes Everything, talks about the real need for what we call a Marshall Plan to deal with the massive ecological damage. And so we will have to do real-time reparations to the global south. Latin America, but particularly West-Saharan Africa, will be very, very damaged by climate change. And we now know by 2100, 2150 that the Middle East will be too hot in the summer for people to live in.
Well, one of the things that doesn't get talked about a lot, even in the immigration issue, we hear all this about scapegoating immigrants.
Yeah.
But for instance, in the case of Syria, as an example, a lot of it has to do with drought, which is directly attributable to climate change.
Yeah.
So there's not a lot of this discussion as to what is making people move. It isn't just because of economic, which it's mainly economic in many ways, but if you can't get water, or if it's hard to get water, I think you're going to migrate and go somewhere else.
Well, the Arab Spring in Egypt was over the price of wheat initially because Goldman Sachs had overinvested and the price had spiked up for that commodity, and that the inability to actually buy wheat, right, because it's subsidized by the Egyptian government, was one of the economic pulls, and that's climate change, right?
Right.
So climate change is creating that instability.
But doesn't this bring us back to the original idea of utopia and politics?
Yeah.
As utopia is a narrative for politics. So if we're living in a dystopic neoliberal era that is, in one sense, coming to an end, then utopian thinking should be looked at as innovative thinking for a new system.
Yeah.
Because we have all the grim and disastrous history accumulating over time. So now it is time to think in terms of a utopian future so we can design a new system and do it as soon as possible because the current system, as they say, is broken.
Yes.
So this context of putting utopian thinking like that, I think, is probably more practical, ironically.
Yeah, that's right.
It's not pie in the sky.
That's right, because that's where you can start creating policies and ideas, whether you're talking about governmental or whether you're talking about business ideas and proposals. All of it ties in. That's the kind of stuff that I want to talk about because and I want to get into this. And I know we're not going to be able to cover it all in this half hour.
Well, and we rarely are able to cover each of these individual topics on our hour and a half long podcast that we do.
Hour and a half podcast at this point.
And because I have a lot of people in my network, and everybody's got their own particular idea of where you start. Well, it's kind of like when I talk to Dennis Kucinich, I think you just kind of start with everything. And that means an economic discussion. That means social justice. That means environmental, and that's why Bernie Sanders was so popular. Is because he laid it out as basically as you can, and then went issue by issue by issue. Initially, when he started on the campaign trail, before he was forced to get into personality politics.
Right. I think back to your point that yes, utopian thinking is politically urgent. It's politically urgent.
It's actually revolutionary.
Yes.
Right.
Think about it. Ultimately.
Right. Well, we have to also know how to put it into words.
Right. Well, that was what was so amazing about Bernie Sanders' campaign is that he had this working class accent. He sounded like Brooklyn. He spoke directly. He didn't condescend. He had a template that was very commonsensical, and he treated it as if it was common sense. I mean, that was the framing of what Bernie Sanders did so well, say, look at the polling, look at my policies. Most of Europe already has this.
Right.
This is common sense there.
That's
We're not in common sense land.
That's right.
And so the framing of American politics as the delusional aspect of American society was brilliant, because he said, well, actually, what I'm advocating is kind of average in Europe.
That's right.
And those conversations people have at dinner tables or when they're doing dishes, is these stories about other countries doing things better than us. And I think the utopian project is the only practical project, because we're in a dystopia that's pirouetting into an apocalypse. Right, so the only practical thing is now the revolutionary thing.
Right, and you're asking, well, where do we start?
Right.
And we'll start with everything. Start with everything.
Right.
And that's actually sort of true. And this is how we've framed the intellectual outline of our project, and in a very intentional way, much like writing a book, that the introductory episodes to the podcast take a very sort of chapter-like approach to dive into deep systems thinking, because if there's any real indicative problem about the way that we think collectively about politics and our engagement with the problems in the world, is that we engage and we think about surface level things.
Right.
We pay attention to the surface level injustices in our everyday life. That you offended me.
Right, right.
Or that I offended you, right? And then we dialogue around those. But the way that the reason that we're in the dire circumstances that we are in as a species and as a planet are because of these deep structural systems.
Yeah.
And we really need to be able to talk about them when in clear, sensible, and visionary, revolutionary ways if we're going to be able to address these problems in a meaningful way.
Well, starting with the environmental issue.
Yep.
Let's say we know that the technology exists. We can be transitioning to solar and wind and geothermal.
We could have done it 30 years ago.
We could have done it 30
35
years ago.
years ago.
So how do we get there? How do we do that? How do we make that impression on the general public, especially in the United States, to make that happen?
Well, I think for me, everyone has a different driver and mechanism, and one of the key problems with Occupy was that if it did have demands, it was like a 25-line list, a grocery list, and you have to narrow it down to 5 or 6, or in our case, we call it the Slingshot 7 policies that are part of a broad people's platform.
Right, right.
And so on our podcast, the Slingshot 7, we talk about how these 7 things don't cover everything, but they're enough that we can accomplish those tasks.
Right.
And by accomplishing those, we open the parachute of the possible. Right.
That's right.
So we don't have, like, for instance, end police brutality. We don't have,
well, we do really.
Demilitarization.
Demilitarization.
And some of them can be hubcapped under these larger terms. So, like, when we talk about ending the military-industrial complex, it includes police brutality as well as demilitarization of foreign affairs. And
so how do we do that? Do we, there's been proposals to cut the military budget in half. Is that a realistic proposal?
Not under the current system. And this is the problem with the electoral politics only focus is, for me, in my mind, a 28th movement for a 20th Amendment to get out money from politics, private money, and create exclusive public financing. Now,
so how do we do that?
Norway has public financing. Norway has one of the cleanest democracies other than Denmark and New Zealand, and they have public financing. So anyone can run for office, and they all use the same funds.
Right. So, so how do we do any of these things? Regardless of where we start, what the particular leverage point might be.
Because we want to create a world that looks left.
How do we actually do that? And what do we need to do tomorrow to start making that possible? Well, I think you mentioned the Bernie Sanders campaign.
Yes.
And we have talked before about the success of the Labour Party's campaign in UK earlier this year, when after Theresa May called the snap election in April. And Jeremy Corbyn was ready as the leader of the Labour Party to push forward a progressive platform, a comprehensive platform. Again, both Jeremy Corbyn's platform and Bernie Sanders are not radical, they're not necessarily utopian, they're even can be considered neoliberal to a certain degree, but they're a comprehensive set of values that are an articulation of what society ought to look like.
That's right, and Chris, they use taglines again. That's another thing from our marketing culture.
Right.
So they use democratizing the economy, or the alternative models of ownership, and then those words themselves and the way they're put together, they get people to thinking about something different than the system that we have now.
And for the Labour Party, it was for the many. Not the few,
exactly.
So the interesting thing about the Labour Party is the left is horrible at marketing, right? The Democratic Party historically called the party of the complex sentence, and the right is called, the Republican Party is called the party of the compound sentence, right? And so the ability to phrase and market has been ingenious for neoliberalism, and the Republican Party just understands branding and terms.
That's right.
I mean, you saw the debate with Mike Pence. He talked about the cornfields of Iowa. They just have this way of massaging goop onto people. Right. But what was great about the manifesto was the Labor manifesto, if you looked at it, was just designed better than the Tory manifesto.
That's right.
It was absolutely garbage. Actually, if you go to the Tory manifesto, Theresa May's face is stretched out like a banana.
Yeah, I know.
It's just like, what the hell?
They didn't even know how to format the document.
It looks like 1990s Photoshop. And so when you went to the the Labor Party manifesto had a beautiful image of people,
Yeah.
for the many, not the few,
Yeah.
and then you could tap and it would open up into very simple folders, very
Yeah,
legible,
yeah.
and not giant Bibles of description.
And it was
Yeah.
readable. It was
Yeah,
language
yeah.
that was
Right.
accessible.
That's
Again,
right.
the quality of the appeal, broad appeal, and I think this is why these things need to. We've seen the success is because it engages a broad audience, and this is what we need to do in terms of deep systems and addressing deep systems problems and institutional problems. We need to be able to speak in ways that relate to people, and in ways that people can get passionate about.
Yeah, and I think I think the thing with what's really inspiring for people that were crushed, like I was, by Bernie Sanders' loss of the primary and the rigging wholesale by the Democratic Party for Hillary Clinton, was when Bernie Sanders called Jeremy Corbyn saying congratulations on the election, and he said, well, how did you do? Can you tell me? I mean, what was it that did? And Jeremy Corbyn says, oh, we just followed your campaign.
That's
and
right.
if that tells you anything,
That's right.
it says that we can leapfrog off of each other. Because remember, Margaret Thatcher came first, then Reagan.
That's right.
Blair, then Clinton. Jeremy Corbyn or Bernie Sanders is someone like Bernie Sanders. And so we should feel excited, actually,
That's right.
because we're seeing the effects of Bernie Sanders now in Britain. So we can build off that.
And part of the manifesto also includes some policies going back to a company prior to Thatcher coming into power. So they were borrowing some of those ideas that were shut down by the neoliberal movement and the trickle-down economics nonsense, which came even in this country with Ronald Reagan, which we are still, just like McCarthyism, we're still trapped in that nonsense. I wanted to show this real quick 30-second joke with comedian Jimmy Dore as part of this discussion. This is recently from the Americans for Democratic Action in Santa Monica. They had a fundraiser there with Jimmy Dore and Greg Palast, and this is a great joke. Let's watch that right now, and we'll talk.
It's so crazy that the United States has a conservative party that's in complete disarray, and the Republicans are falling apart too. Am I right? All right. Oh boy, I think the Democrats, they won't even, not only are they incapable of change, they won't even say the word single payer. They're so afraid to say single payer, it's like the Russians invented it. Hey, turns out Russia has it. Son of a bitch. Son of a bitch.
Okay, so basically, both parties are conservative. We have a two-party system, right? Democrats and Republicans, and even Gore Vidal, I think, identified it long ago. He said we have a one party, which is the property party, made up of two right wings.
And what David Harvey calls the Wall Street Party.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's in both political parties.
Yeah.
We have one party that's conservative and one party that's racist.
That's a really good point. That's a very good point. And that should be the discussion that we're having about our political system right now. Yeah, absolutely.
What Trump was able to do, which is interesting, is bring the white supremacy component of the party together with the Wall Street right libertarian component. So everyone thinks that he's an outlier. He was the only one that would ever be able to bring those two things together. And so actually he's a natural formation within the this white obsessed Republican Party, is that he was able to bring those two together. And so people are willing to follow along the lines. And Hillary thought, oh, the Republicans, moderates will vote for me. 9 out of 10 Republicans voted for Donald Trump. She didn't get the Republicans because they're very practical. They'll, okay, we'll take a bit of this neo-Nazi stuff, but we're going to get some tax credits from this.
That's right. And that's really what they're talking about, because they want to. But then the Obama administration continued the Bush tax cuts so that they could create the political narrative that we don't have to borrow from China anymore.
Yes.
So, and then what does a businessman do? What does a successful capitalist businessman do when you have extra money? You know you're not having to pay an Eisenhower-era tax rate, and you can loan that money to the government. Interest. I'm going to make some money on this. See, and the American public doesn't realize how they get screwed in that way.
Yeah.
Well, I think what's happening, back to utopian thinking.
Yeah.
I think what we have is the failed utopia of the Demo-Republican capitalist parties.
Yeah.
And that is leading us into institutional crises right now. So the American dream has turned into the American nightmare.
Yeah.
And what happened last year in the election, I think, highlighted the major political crisis of legitimacy in the country.
Yeah.
You know, the either-or fallacy, so to speak, is over with. So back to utopian thinking, where it's ironically practical to say, okay, these don't work. We need a new vision. We need new institutional, alternative institutions. So therefore, this is a good time to use utopian thinking to create new, effective public policies.
Right, right.
Because ironically, there's a contradiction in American consciousness. One of them is that, well, Americans are supposed to be forward-looking people. So the concept of utopianism means you look forward into the future and hopefully a better future. Okay? So the left has got to take that, okay, and move with that as a message to people.
We've got to also, the left has to also bring back, you know, notions of freedom, right? Why do the Republican Party control notions of freedom? We talk about the building of cooperatives, community land trusts. That's freedom, right? That's economic freedom.
That's right.
Why does the universal have to be the province of the Republican Party, which gets to wrap themselves up in that, where the academic circles talk about the particularities of people? We have to bring back the universal as part
Well,
of that.
I think the when I think of in terms of solutions, I think, you know, like the New Deal was a short-term solution, and no long-term plan was put into place, and that was by design. Now we are going to learn from that mistake. And we're going to, okay, we need short-term solutions. Universal basic income, as they're seeing in the pilot program in Finland, it's working. It's putting money in people's pockets right now so that they don't have to worry about getting their bills paid. They don't have to worry about getting food on the table. We're talking about basic necessities that everybody needs to survive. Now, the long term, it makes sense to me, is worker cooperatives, where people still have to be educated about how to do this. And believe me, George and I have created Arete Media, along with some great people here that produced the intro you saw here on the show. And it's hard work, but it's relationship based, and that is where we have to start. We have to start about caring for one another and not about the bottom line or the dollar bill, or think about it. When you take a dollar bill out of your pocket, you've probably been handled by who knows how many people. It's a dirty piece of paper. You got to wash your hands, really.
Well, it's dirty in many, many ways.
In many, many ways. I mean,
it's a bloody piece of paper.
It's a bloody piece of paper. So let's, unfortunately, start to wind this down a little bit.
I think the main thing is that capitalism's built on deception and deceit and ripping each other off, and that we have to move in a utopian fashion to an economic system based on love and solidarity. So it takes hard work to have a co-op, but it's built on love, and it builds from love.
That's right.
Well, I think that the whole idea, from a structural point of view, is that we have to start changing our entire political, social, economic consciousness towards this. And now, again, back to utopian thinking, and ironically, making it practical thinking. That yes, we can change the way we look at each other, our relationships. We have to bring politics back, democracy back into the workplace, into life, to repoliticize people, because what has happened over the decades is that we've detached people from governance, from politics, and they become spectators.
And just spectators instead of participants in the entire system across the spectrum, whether it's where you work, where you live, how you vote, or if you vote, all of that. There isn't one part of society where there should not be participation.
And I'm optimistic, given the activities and voice, the rising voice of the millennial generation.
Yes.
Having
and the Zers.
And the Zers.
Zennials.
Zennials, yeah.
But you know, specifically having the experiences that they have had of rising tuition costs and mounting debt, and the inability to find meaningful and well-paying work so that they can pay off that debt. Endless wars, unjustified wars, and a sort of dizzying array of lies that they see on the news every day. So I am heartened by the growth of organizations like the Democratic Socialists of America, which has gone from 8,000 members last year to over 25,000 members this year.
That's right.
And I am heartened by the voices that are standing up against neo-Nazis and white supremacy.
Absolutely.
Both last weekend in response to the events in Charlottesville, Virginia, and this today as we record this in Boston, and that they are seeing that these things are evidence of the faulty design, the institutional failures, right? That this world is poorly designed, and that we have to come up with a better vision for the world and work to get there.
Yeah, what happened in Charlottesville is a very good example of the Antifa movement, the anti-fascist movement, a generation actually not being spectators. They stood up and said, we've had enough of this.
That's
so they're essentially fighting against a system that's in decay, the famous saying that capitalism in decay turns into fascism.
That's right, and that's one of those areas it's like war. When I was a peace activist, you have to be anti-war, anti-fascism. I mean, we have to have a strong position there. We're going to have to wrap this up. So, some final thoughts?
Yeah, like I said, I am around millennials all the time, and the crucial thing that gives me optimism is not just their sense of solidarity with each other, but their rage at the unfair deal they've been given.
That's right. Well, we have to go, but we're going to have to continue this conversation another time. It's fantastic. Thank you, Matt Snyder and Jesse Herring from the Future is a Mixtape podcast, and also political analyst Professor George Kallas. This is Nice Wander, and hope you enjoyed our live show here on YouTube. Check out the solar eclipse wherever you are. And until next time, be present always. The checkered one, yeah. That's what the Hollywood Reporter would say, right? Yeah. And for those younger, if you're into animation, he was also the voice you heard in Up, which was also an Academy Award-winning film recently. And Christina's been involved. We can talk in more detail. You can explain it. Yeah. How you've been involved in third parties and supporting independence, etc. First of all, you just finished a talk here, Blake, and I have a quote here of you said, "We are living a lie. Our day of reckoning is now here." Can you elaborate on that?
Did she say that or did I?
You said that.
Oh, I can't believe I said
that. Oh no.
We got it on tape.
Yeah,
I'm sure.
Yeah.
It's a printing error. Well, we are living a lie, don't you think?
Yeah.
We are in a facade.
Because we don't represent the people that we have in this country. Our voting percentages are sucky.
Yeah.
They're sucky, and we keep finding, in this particular case, the Republicans keep creating voting machine problems, question constant gerrymandering of districts, both locally and statewide. And unless the people rise up and say enough, because we're even corrupting the courts now.
That's right.
And this latest edition, what's his name? Strange name. To the
Scaramucci?
No,
Oh.
not that joker. The latest justice, Supreme Court justice. What's his name? See, kind of Americans are. You don't even know.
Yeah, I know.
About to replace them all in.
Yeah, I know. There's so many that. But you know,
It is an illusion, though.
It is an
I
illusion.
agree, a facade that we've been living in. Just the reality is that the two-party system has not been serving we, the people. And so until and when we rise together as a nation, as a world, as a country world, that's when we're going to bring about real change, believing in change and hope. That's where we stand at with Ed and being a supporter of Free and Equal Elections Foundation, which I founded, but it's for the people. This foundation's for you guys. And so that's really, consciousness is rising. And
Yes.
We are seeing what's real, what isn't real. And that's why we're here today with media like you. We find you to be real media,
Yes.
telling the real truth and the people out there. So, and Ed as well, Bill's joining us for that.
You think America should rule the world?
No.
No.
I think that the people should maybe come together and really not allow narcissistic,
Well, you're supposed to have a thing
sociopathic
called the UN
politicians
for
to run
that,
our country.
Isn't that
UN's
what-
not something.
UN's not going to do that.
Then what do you want to create that's going to be better than the UN?
Free and equal elections. Article 1, Section 3 of
And
the
you're going to be able to
Constitution.
see that it's done throughout the world.
All elections shall be free and equal, yes. But we've got to fix the United States of America first.
What about
The whole world's
proportional
watching us.
representation? Does that enter into fair and equal?
Yes.
Yes.
Free and equal elections, proportional representation, I feel is
Ranked
probably-
choice voting.
Alternative voting methods are solutions. So many people are talking about all the problems, the left and right, the divide. A lot of panels here
Yeah.
at Politicon
Yeah.
are that way. But I think more in the future are going to be about uniting and solutions and coming together. So definitely going in that direction.
But you know, one of the things that you don't see in Europe, which we see here, is like Citizens United, which opened the floodgates to private money coming into our process. You know, I've interviewed people even on this show that will tell me, like in the Netherlands, for instance, lobbying money, private money going into the government is actually illegal, and you go to prison. And yet, it's the natural way of how business is done here. And obviously,
Why? The Netherlands is such a little country.
Oh.
And has leakage problems. We don't have any of that.
Oh. Do we?
Do you want to become the Netherlands? You're going to have to put up dams and dikes. Hmm?
Oh, that's true, eh?
You know?
Yeah, yeah.
You keep out the water.
Yeah.
Not fun.
That's not fun. Yeah,
And there ain't much profit in it either.
Yeah.
Well, maybe you can make an analogy that we're putting up dams and dikes to democracy here through the system that we have. That's why it's in a crisis.
Oh, but those are okay.
Because we have the Electoral College. Now, what is the plan to go through the electoral system institutionally? What have you proposed?
On the judicial side, last I checked, it's a two-party system
Right.
that
Yeah.
chooses who runs our judicial system, which is flawed. I mean, the fact
Okay.
that the prison systems are primarily filled with people because of past possession of marijuana. I mean, there's so much greed
yes.
and money, and then pharmaceutical, it's a whole nother thing. But as far as on the electoral side and institutionalized, I love that you brought up proportional representation. Talking about different alternative voting methods like score voting and approval voting, ranked choice voting, which is also known as instant runoff voting, which I think the Grammys use that. Maine just passed it.
really?
I see it spreading throughout the U.S. very quickly.
What's that, proportional?
Yes.
Proportional.
Yes, I mean, That is something very dear for over 10 years. I've been manifesting and through free and equal elections. That's something I feel that would really
So you're
serve our
starting
elections.
your strategy at the grassroots level, state, local, regional.
Yes, real change. A wise man once taught me by the name of Mr. Ed Asner.
Oh, God.
At our
Not him
candidates
again.
forum in Cambria, California, where we're headquartered, real change starts from the bottom up.
Has to.
Gotta run for local office, and that's
That's
when we
right.
get into the
You gotta get
youth
your
and
hands
getting
dirty.
That's
involved.
right. Well, you know, as far as third parties are concerned, there's the one I talked to Michael Feinstein,
Yeah, I know.
who is he's been in the Green Party here in California since the
He was the mayor
1990s.
of
He was the
Santa
mayor
Monica.
of Santa Monica. Over 1,000.
Not the piano player.
No, not the different guy. Different guy. Yeah. People ask me that too, like, oh, the piano player. No, this is a different guy. He says that over 300 Greens have been elected to local offices in California alone, over 1,000 nationwide since the 90s. And they do have, here and now, an infrastructure in place. You know, where, as you mentioned earlier, it's outrageous to have so much money just to get somebody on the ballot. What is that about?
Huh. That's ballot access in the 1890s. I think through the Australian ballot it came about where they decided we're going to require a certain amount of signatures for candidates to get on the ballot.
Yeah.
And it just sometimes or often or pretty much always is more signatures for third parties and independent candidates. So that's more of the stranglehold, the rigged system that, yes, Trump and Sanders touched into, but they didn't go into it.
Yeah.
And so
Yeah.
back into the voting methods, the ballot access, the closed presidential debates, the
Yep.
commission on presidential debates, and so on, gerrymandering. These are things that we will fix. We have to. The latter's not an option.
Well, it's so, you know, when the discussion about, you know, alleged rigging, like for instance of the primary, 2016, the Democratic primary. I mean, what do you call superdelegates, for instance? Just that concept alone. How can you say that I'm voting before the actual election happens? It doesn't make any sense, you know. And what is your take on that?
Well, that's a good, well, if you're super, you gotta flaunt it.
Yeah, I guess so. Like a superhero, right?
Gotta show who you are.
Yeah.
Why I oughta.
Who else is gonna call him super?
That's right.
I mean, when the election's over, they're gonna forget about the super. They're gonna.
Well, you know, back like in
So
19
superinflated egos,
Superinflated
too.
egos.
That took them past, didn't they?
Ego needs
Well,
to.
well, you can go all the way back to like 1944 with Henry Wallace, you know, who was.
Oh, what a hatchet job they did on him.
Yeah, I know.
Woo!
Right?
Good, yeah.
And, you know, and of course.
The other thing is, Lincoln was the first Republican ever elected, right?
Yeah, that's right. That's right.
Before that, it was the Whigs.
And just because, you know, Henry Wallace was a socialist and a pacifist, you know, the business people that made the atomic bomb were thinking, oh, well, we can't test this now if we have a president that's a pacifist. What do you think about that? That's a historical thing that we didn't get in school, but if you think about it.
That's not an actual quote you gave us.
What's that?
That's not an actual quote you gave us.
A quote? No. But he was a pacifist.
I know he was a president, and he was a wonderful progressive.
Yeah.
But I don't know that the fascists did say we can't have Wallace in there.
Oh, yeah.
Passive.
We can't say it's a quote. Yeah.
So doesn't that point to the idea that we've had a structured kind of duopoly of power between the Democrats and Republicans?
Well, it's the same thing as has always existed in Latin America.
Yeah.
You had the liberals or the conservatives,
Right.
and they both committed unspeakable acts, but it was okay because they were doing it.
But even in American political history, you look at Democrat and Republican, even in foreign policy, liberal or conservative, during the Cold War era, the Red Scare, they were very close together, even up to today, if you look from a foreign policy point of view. And as I think you rightly said in the conference, regardless of the gentleman's response about uber alles, there is truth that we are an empire.
Yeah.
That is on the record, even the New York Times says so, which is not maybe a very proud thing, because by definition, empires are they're anti-democratic. So we have a contradiction.
Also, they don't last.
They don't last.
That's right.
I think people have to tell people that.
And I think we're on the decline, don't you?
Oh, God,
Seriously.
No.
Well, oh, of course we are.
No.
Economically.
We'll
I
probably
mean-
create World War III.
You think so?
Oh, yeah.
It's not a permanent thing on the decline, maybe in the moment.
Well, it could
But
be a
we're gonna
decline
get out
before a
of it.
rise, depending on what the
We have-
transition.
We have to get out of it.
It all depends
You're
on
talking about a transition, even though
Trans-
there is a crisis.
Evolution.
if we surrender our ownership of the world, then maybe we'll last.
You're right. So you cut defense spending by 50%, I believe, was proposed.
You cut the two-party duopoly.
Cut the duopoly. So you have, this is
Yeah.
what we call the crisis of legitimacy,
Yeah.
crisis of institutions. And institute obviously is everything, the whole bag, so to speak.
Right now, there's,
So.
that's so.
You're being under surveillance.
Right now, there is a potential bill lurking in the Congress. And it has enormous numbers of supporters in both houses that to criminalize anybody who pushes the boycott bill on Israel.
The BDS movement.
yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
To make it a felony, which
Yeah.
apparently has been argued
Like
that.
20 years in prison,
Right.
hundreds of thousands of dollars fine.
Right.
Wow.
Now this, who is spinning whom?
Right.
Are we controlling Israel, or is Israel controlling us?
That's a good point. Don't we give them something like $40 billion a year? And where does that money go? And what are they required to do with that money? Buy our military?
Wouldn't that be another form of
surprise-
money in politics, though? Because now we're engaging domestic and foreign policy being fused together through money.
Yeah.
And that's one of the other problems we have in institutions, because people are saying, well, why don't we take care of ourselves first, take care of our economy, and get out of the empire business. But you have other overseas connections and businesses, because we're a globalized economy. And you got some very big, powerful players.
Right.
And it actually revealed itself to the Trump administration, where he says, well, his rhetoric was what? We're going to bring jobs back to America. And he played kind of the everyman rhetoric, when in fact he's the penultimate capitalist billionaire.
Right.
And
Right.
so we're
It doesn't even
we're,
pay his people well.
we're in an
Yeah,
age of
yeah.
irony. We're in an age of massive contradictions, and I think that leads to the political confusion we addressed earlier.
That's right.
How do we clear that up? And back to what you said, you should start with electoral system.
Yeah.
You know,
We need to get people into local offices on all levels. You know, focus on that and get people engaged.
I'll buy that.
Yeah.
The confusion is also a strategy of the system, but we're going through it. The parties are breaking down into smaller parties, and eventually people realize as those smaller parties become larger, they inevitably become infiltrated.
Right.
Yeah.
So
We don't have time for that.
and I mean,
We're running out of time. We
or
know
we can just have
a lot of people have not recovered from the 2008 economic crisis. You know what I mean? And we have people that there's underemployed, re-unemployed, off the records. I mean, and 94% of the jobs that were created during the Obama administration were temporary part-time gig jobs.
Really?
And low wage.
94%.
94%. That was, and those were the two economists that worked with Obama. So they're not, they're admitting that.
They're with for Obama.
Yes, worked for Obama. There's a difference, right? And the Oxfam statistics each year keep getting worse and worse that they release. In Davos, Switzerland every year in January. Last year, when I first reported it on my show, there was something like 80-some people had as much wealth as the bottom 50% of the world's population. This January, 8 people. I mean, and nothing's being done. There's no discussion about short-term or long-term solutions for that. What do you think about universal basic income? There's a pilot program actually in Finland right now that's actually working well.
It's a great idea.
Yeah.
Until and when we get accountable people in office, I don't trust anything that Congress pushes through or tries to push through or gridlock. I just don't trust the people that are in Congress right now. You follow the money, and they care about money and themselves more than we the people.
I think you're addressing
So
a very
it's a
important
great
issue
Once we get accountable people in, we can talk about those issues and let people locally decide if it's universal, if that's what they want. Let the people decide.
How would you, if you were designing, how would you redesign it to hold them accountable? So when they get elected, they cannot change their words or promises. That's the system we have.
That's a
Once
problem.
they get elected,
That's a huge
they
problem.
jettison the voter and then kind of go on autopilot.
I mean, term limits is definitely something that would probably, with accountable people in office, let's serve one term, it's a duty, it's not gonna be, it's gonna be a tough job, not big money pension payouts, which is the way it is currently and shouldn't be. These multi-million-dollar gold semi-plated whatever pensions are definitely a big reason why we're in a deficit too.
And the corporate
so.
subsidies that and the people, like for instance, if Obama had given everybody $30,000 instead of bailing out the banks, we'd be in a whole different situation right now. And I want to wrap this up real quick. We got about a couple of minutes or so. I think a long-term solution, to get your view on this, is the workers taking ownership of the means of production, whether that's factories, offices, stores.
What society did that work in before? And why wouldn't it maintain? It was practically employed, wasn't it?
Well,
in Italy right now.
In Basque region, Spain, Catalan is most famous.
Right.
Which was successful, actually,
That's
which
right.
was obviously during the height of the Civil War. Too.
That's right. That's
But
right.
right now, Mondragon in Basque right now is a multi-billion-dollar, up and running community. It's like a federation of
And they have
Mondragon in Spain, in Basque region.
Basque
In fact, there's a
region of
USA version. I believe the United Steelworkers are working with them to bring it to the
that's
United
right.
States.
They're working with them. They also have joint projects with Microsoft as well as General Motors, and they right now have over 75,000 people in their cooperative total. Hundreds of companies. They have a university, a bank, an IT department. Italy actually has the most cooperatives because the government actually has a more thorough law that they offer support for people to help them create the worker cooperatives. So guess what? They have the most. So it can be done, and
there's no political will.
That's right.
Like everything else.
And Democracy at Work is the organization now that's working to create that advocacy and encourage people to create those groups. So.
Well, solutions-wise, we were at the beginning in this, before we went on the air, you talked about the youth, right? And
Quickly, how can we get
solutions
the youth engaged?
Because, we can talk all these problems all day long, but what do we do to fix it? I mean, I don't know about you, but I am tired of the problems.
Well, let's continue this conversation in another interview.
Sure. And briefly, the 18 to 28-year-olds are the game changers. And when they come out, you have no jobs, you have nothing to do, you have low paying, right?
Yes.
You're saying, run for office. I ran for Secretary of State at 27 years of age.
Great.
For California.